Cross, she's not on the manifest. She was never on the manifest. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Vale said it like she didn't exist. And for 8 hours, he made sure she didn't. The last truck cleared the gate at 6:42 p.m. 62 soldiers, gone. Fort Resolute empty, except for one woman they left behind to die. No backup, no radio, no one coming. Outside the fence, 92 armed attackers were already moving in from 3 directions, certain they were walking into an abandoned base. They were wrong. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross was alone, outnumbered 92-1 in minus 24 degrees, and she had already decided she was not moving. If you are watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because what Evelyn did next in those 8 hours is something you will never forget. The last truck in the convoy cleared the main gate at exactly 6:42 in the evening. Evelyn Cross heard it before she saw it. The grinding of tires on packed ice, the low rumble of engines pulling away through the frozen dark. She was standing inside the communications building, her hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee that had already gone cold, watching the timestamp on the emergency relay console tick forward with the kind of patience only someone who has spent years waiting in silence can truly understand. She told herself the helicopter would come. That was the plan. The convoy goes first, the helicopter follows, and she locks up the relay console and climbs aboard. Simple. Clean, 30 minutes, maybe 45, and she'd be back with the unit filing paperwork in a warm room somewhere, while someone else dealt with the fallout from whatever this cyber attack actually was. She believed that. She genuinely believed it. She stood in that building alone for another 20 minutes before she allowed herself to look out the window and register what her gut had already been telling her for the past half hour. The base was completely, utterly, impossibly silent. Fort Resolute had housed 63 soldiers 48 hours ago. The barracks had been loud and the mess hall had smelled like overcooked potatoes and too much coffee, and someone on the night shift had always been playing music too loud from the second floor. There had been life here, not comfortable, life not easy life, but human life, the kind that fills empty spaces with noise and warmth, and the particular chaos of people trying to do difficult work in a difficult place. Now there was nothing. The barracks were dark. The mess hall doors had been chained shut. The medical station, every single piece of equipment, every supply cabinet, every emergency kit had been loaded and driven away. Emergency power kept 3 banks of lights running along the main corridor and inside the communications building, but everything else was off. The generators were at 15% capacity and falling. When the fuel ran out, even that would go. Evelyn set her coffee thermos down very carefully on the edge of the console. She picked up the radio handset and transmitted on the primary frequency. Fort Resolute to Central Command. This is Staff Sergeant Cross. I am still on station, requesting confirmation of extraction timeline. Over. Static. She tried the secondary frequency, then the emergency channel, then the satellite relay, which was the whole reason she was still standing there in the first place, the classified emergency relay that was supposed to maintain communication continuity during the cyber attack, while the rest of the base evacuated to safety. Nothing came back. Not static, not interference, genuine, complete silence, as if the radio had stopped believing anyone was out there. She stood very still for a moment. Then she walked to the door, stepped outside into the Alaskan cold, minus 24 degrees, wind coming off the northern ridgeline. The kind of cold that presses against your face like something alive, and looked out across the empty base with the particular expression of someone who has just understood something they are not happy about understanding. Her name had not been on that manifest. She was certain of it now. She had assumed it was a clerical delay, a last-minute scheduling issue, the kind of administrative chaos that happened during fast evacuations. She had assumed someone would come back for her. She understood now that no one was coming back. What she did not understand yet, what she could not possibly have understood, standing there in the cold at 6:59 in the evening, was why. She didn't know about the pen and the clipboard. She didn't know that Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Vale had looked at her name and made a decision. She didn't know that support personnel was the phrase he had used, or that he had told his aide that she would be fine until morning, that it was a secure installation, that nothing was going to happen. She just knew she was alone. Evelyn Cross was 35 years old. She had served 12 years in the United States Army, and in those 12 years, she had been underestimated, so consistently and so thoroughly that she had long since stopped being surprised by it. She was quiet where other soldiers were loud. She was precise where others were aggressive. She had white hair, completely strikingly white. She had, since she was 9 years old after a serious illness, had done something to her pigmentation that no doctor had ever fully explained, and that white hair had made her a target for ridicule since elementary school, and that ridicule had followed her into the army in subtler forms, the kind that wore the face of professionalism. She was support personnel. She could wait until morning. She went back inside. She pulled up the base schematics on the emergency terminal. She took stock of what she had, her designated marksman rifle, the Mk-14, enhanced battle rifle she had carried for 3 years and maintained with the obsessive care of someone who understood that her life depended on it. 240 rounds of ammunition in her pouches, a sidearm, a combat knife, her cold weather kit, the emergency medical supplies she kept on her person at all times, because she had been in enough remote postings to know that the only medical care you could absolutely count on was the care you could provide yourself. She had no reinforcements, no backup, no guaranteed communications, no indication that anyone in the chain of command even knew she was still here. She sat down in the chair in front of the relay console and thought about that for approximately 90 seconds. Then she got up and started working. The perimeter sensor system was still active motion detectors and infrared cameras positioned at intervals around the base's outer fence. Most military personnel didn't bother learning the sensor network in detail. That was IT work, that was support work, that was the kind of thing you delegated to the specialists and forgot about. Evelyn had spent 2 weeks learning it when she first arrived at Fort Resolute because she had learned early in her career that knowing the systems everyone else ignored was the most reliable way to survive the situations everyone else failed to anticipate. She pulled up the sensor display and started running diagnostics. At 7:04 p.m., all 16 sensors reported normal. Cold, dark, empty. At 7:11 p.m., sensors 7 and 8 southeast quadrant, covering the approach from the lower ridge road, went from green to amber. Not triggered, not alarmed, just a flicker, the kind of reading that meant something warm had passed through the field at the edge of detection range. Evelyn stared at the screen. Wildlife. Could be wildlife. There were wolves in this range and caribou and sometimes even bears that hadn't found their winter caves yet. Could be anything. Sensor 12 went amber. Northwest approach. Then sensor 3. North. 3 separate approach vectors activating in sequence, each one at the outer edge of the detection field. Not converging randomly, advancing together from different directions with the coordinated timing of people who had rehearsed this. Evelyn's hand was already on her rifle before the thought completed itself. She keyed the emergency transmitter one more time. She spoke clearly without panic because panic was a luxury she could not afford. Fort Resolute to any station. This is Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross. I am the sole occupant of this installation. I am detecting multiple contacts on the perimeter sensors, at least 3 approach vectors. I say again, I am the only person on this base. Anyone receiving this transmission, please respond. Fort Resolute out. The static that came back was profound, total, like the world had decided to stop listening. She thought about her father. Master Sergeant Robert Cross had taught her to shoot when she was 7 years old. Not because he wanted a soldier for a daughter, he had never pushed her toward the army, had in fact spent several conversations trying to talk her out of it, but because he believed that competence was the foundation of confidence, and that confidence was the foundation of character, and that a person who could do one hard thing well would be able to face other hard things without flinching. He had also told her when she was 9 years old and coming home from school with tears on her face because the other children wouldn't stop talking about her hair, that being different was not the same as being weak, that the things that made you a target were often the same things that made you dangerous. That strength was not the absence of fear or pain or loneliness. Strength was standing anyway when everyone around you had already decided you would fall. She had thought about those words many times over 12 years. She thought about them now standing in the communications building of an evacuated Alaskan military installation with approximately 90 seconds before she needed to be somewhere else. "All right," she said quietly to the empty room. She picked up her rifle and walked out the door. 740 miles away in a heated command post outside of Fairbanks, Captain Caleb Warren was staring at an evacuation roster. He had been staring at it for the better part of an hour. He was a thorough man by nature, not paranoid, not anxious, but thorough in the way that comes from having learned early and painfully that the details that seem too small to check are almost always the ones that become catastrophic. He had gone through the manifest twice, checking names against his mental roster of Fort Resolute's personnel. And the second time through, he had stopped at the bottom of the second page and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the Alaskan temperature. He flipped back to the beginning, read through it again, counted. Then he walked very quickly to where Lieutenant Colonel Vale was debriefing with two other officers over a map spread across a folding table, and he said with the careful, controlled tone of a man who is working very hard to remain professional, "Sir, I need to address a discrepancy in the evacuation manifest." Vale looked up with the particular expression of a man who considers interruptions an insult to his authority. "Captain, we're in the middle of something. Staff Sergeant Cross is not on this list, sir." A pause, very brief, so brief that Warren almost missed what was in it, the flicker of something that was not surprise. Vale's face settled back into its normal configuration of authority and mild impatience. But for just a moment, just half a second, there had been something else there. Recognition, calculation. "She's listed under support personnel," Vale said, "scheduled for morning extraction." "Sir, there is no morning extraction scheduled. The helicopter roster I'm looking at right now has no assigned flight for Fort Resolute tomorrow morning." "Then we'll schedule one." "Sir, the installation has a classified communications relay that is still active. She is alone on an installation with active equipment and no backup, no medical support, and no guaranteed communications, given the current cyber attack status. I need to request permission to take a vehicle back up that mountain road, and the mountain road is impassable after dark, Captain. The road was passable 2 hours ago when we drove down it. Temperature has dropped." Vale's voice had taken on the specific flat quality of a man who has decided a conversation is over. "The installation is secure. She's a capable soldier. She'll be fine until morning. I will not risk my personnel on an unnecessary—" "Sir, with respect, I am asking you to tell me that you know Staff Sergeant Cross is still on that base and that you are making a deliberate command decision to postpone her extraction." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Warren counted them. "I am aware of Sergeant Cross's position," Vale said, "and I am telling you, Captain, that the mountain road is impassable. The sector is secure, and we will address her extraction in the morning. If you push this one more time tonight, I will relieve you of duty and have someone else file the paperwork. Do you understand me?" Warren looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, sir," he said. He walked away. He did not stop moving. He went to a corner of the command post where there was a secure terminal, and he started making phone calls. Back at Fort Resolute, Evelyn had climbed to the top of the Eastern Guard Tower. She pressed herself against the wall below the sightline and raised her rifle scope to her eye and looked out across the snowfield that stretched between the base's outer fence and the tree line. And what she saw made her exhale very slowly through her nose and count methodically the way her father had taught her to count heartbeats before a shot. They came out of the trees in a loose formation. Not a mob, not a ragged charge, but a disciplined, advanced people who knew how to move, who had trained for this specific kind of operation. They were wearing tactical gear, carrying military pattern rifles, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a unit that had rehearsed entry procedures. She counted. She counted carefully because the number mattered. The number was going to determine everything that came next. 47 from the tree line to her south. Another formation, maybe 22, coming along the access road from the east. And from the north advancing across the open ridgeline with the kind of confidence that said they expected to walk into an empty base at least another 2392. Evelyn Cross was alone on an evacuated military installation in the middle of an Alaskan night with 240 rounds of ammunition, no backup, no communications, and 92 armed attackers converging on her position from 3 directions. She breathed out. She thought about running. She was honest enough with herself to admit that. The mountains were behind her. She knew the terrain. She could move through that landscape in the dark better than any of the people now crossing the snowfield because she had spent weeks hiking those ridges on her off days, mapping every trail, every ravine, every windbreak, because she was the kind of soldier who did things like that while everyone else slept in. And she could probably get out. She could probably survive. The relay console sat in the building behind her, active and transmitting, connected to the communications infrastructure of 3 Alaskan communities that were currently operating without their normal network coverage because of the cyber attack. If the people crossing that snowfield seized that relay, they would have access to military traffic, to evacuation routing, data, to emergency response coordinates. 3 communities full of people, elderly people, families, children would be exposed in ways they could not even understand or prepare for. Evelyn thought about all of that in approximately the time it took her to chamber around. She pressed the transmitter on her tactical radio one more time. No one answered. She didn't expect them to. "This is Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross," she said to no one and everyone. "I am the sole defender of Fort Resolute. I am engaging hostile forces. If anyone receives this transmission, I need backup at this location. I will hold as long as I am able." She settled her cheek against the stock of the rifle. She found the late vehicle of the eastern column in her scope, a heavy truck moving slowly along the access road, headlights cutting through the dark, the driver probably assuming the gate would open automatically because automated systems would assume the base was still staffed. She had already cut the power to the automated gate system. She had done that before climbing the tower. It was one of the first things she had thought of, and the fact that she had thought of it first said something about how her mind worked under pressure. She adjusted for wind. She adjusted for distance. She breathed out slow and complete the way her father had shown her 26 years ago in a field outside their home in Western Virginia. A patient man standing behind his daughter who was 9 years old and completely serious about this, who had already understood that precision was a form of power. She pulled the trigger. The round went through the engine block of the lead truck, which stopped moving immediately, which blocked the entire eastern access road and forced the column behind it to either stop back up or find another way in. All of those options took time. Time was the one resource she could manufacture out of discipline and knowledge and the willingness to make every decision count. The sound of the shot rolled out across the snowfield and echoed off the mountain ridges, and she watched the formations below her break apart into cover, saw them scatter behind trees and snowbanks in the stunted scrubland at the edge of the field, and she was already moving before the echo faded, already dropping down from the tower and into the maintenance tunnel that ran below the eastern wall, already headed for the northern tower. Because whoever was commanding that force was going to spend the next 30 seconds triangulating the shot origin, and in 31 seconds they were going to start shooting back at the eastern tower. She came up in the northern tower as the first return fire crackled against the eastern wall. She settled the scope again, found a muzzle flash in the tree line tracked left along what she estimated was the command position for the southern formation, and put a round into a communications antenna mounted on a vehicle at the forest edge. Not a person, a piece of equipment. She could hear the radio traffic already. She had a small receiver tuned to the most common tactical frequencies, and she wanted their command net disrupted before they could issue coordinated orders for the breach. The communications vehicle went dark. She moved again. In the tree line, Silas Rourke pressed himself against a pine trunk and listened to the chaos on his radio net and felt the first hint of something that he had not anticipated feeling tonight. Silas Rourke was 51 years old and had spent 23 of those years in various forms of armed conflict. First as a contractor, working for the U.S. government in places no one officially acknowledged, then as an independent operator working for people who paid well and asked few questions, and finally as the founder and operational commander of Black Summit, which was not a mercenary company in any legal sense, because it operated entirely within the theoretical framework of domestic security consulting, which was a distinction that Rourke's lawyers found very important and that Rourke himself found very convenient. I had planned this operation for 6 weeks. The cyber attack had been Black Summit's engineered specifically to create the conditions for the evacuation, because an empty Fort Resolute was the operation. The relay was worth more than anyone outside of a classified briefing understood, not because of the military communications it carried, but because of the routing architecture it connected to. The civilian emergency networks piggybacking on military infrastructure that had never been properly separated because someone in a budget meeting 15 years ago had decided that redundancy was expensive. He had expected to walk into an empty building. He had walked into an ambush. "Talk to me," he said into his radio. "How many shooters are we looking at?" 3 confirmed positions. One of his team leaders came back. Maybe 4, could be more. East Tower, North Tower were tracking fire from both, but they moved fast between shots. There might be a tunnel. There's definitely a tunnel, Rourke said. He had studied the base schematics. He had not expected the tunnel to matter because he had not expected there to be anyone in the base to use it. How many dead? None confirmed, no casualties. They're not targeting personnel. That stopped him. They're not, he absorbed that. They're firing at vehicles and equipment. Affirmative, command vehicle antenna is gone. Lead truck on the east road is disabled, but no one is hit. Rourke stood very still in the Alaskan cold and processed what he was hearing. A defender or defenders who could hit a vehicle antenna at night in wind from an elevated position who were making deliberate choices not to kill. That was not a group of soldiers thrown into a defensive position by surprise. That was someone who had made a tactical decision. Someone who had thought through the implications of the night, the terrain, the situation, and decided that psychological disruption was more valuable than body count. That was someone dangerous. Break into 2 elements, he said. Team Alpha takes the main gate. Team Bravo goes for the power junction on the south side. We cut the emergency power. We cut their visibility. We cut their ability to maintain this illusion. I use the word deliberately, illusion, because that's what he was beginning to suspect. The shots were coming from too many positions, shifting too quickly for 1 or 2 shooters. Unless the shooters were extraordinarily fast, extraordinarily prepared, and extraordinarily calm, he was starting to think there might be only one. Move, he said, and somebody get me a count on how many sets of footprints are in the snow inside that perimeter. I want to know exactly how many people we're dealing with. Inside the maintenance tunnel running on hands and knees in the dark, Evelyn heard the shift in the radio traffic and understood that Rourke, she didn't know his name, yet she just knew the voice commanding and controlled and thinking had started figuring it out. She had maybe 30 minutes before he knew for certain. 30 minutes to make 92 people believe she was 30. She thought about her father. She thought about him standing behind her in that field with the late afternoon sun on his face, patient, and certain, one hand on her shoulder, telling her that the target was not the enemy. The target was the space between where the bullet starts and where it needs to land, and everything in between: the wind, the angle, the heartbeat, the fear. All of it was just information. Use the information. Don't fight it. Use it. She reached the end of the tunnel and came up inside the vehicle garage, which was empty now except for 3 trucks that had been left behind because they were in various states of disrepair, and 1 piece of equipment that she had already identified as potentially the most important thing on this entire base. The maintenance snowplow, old heavy diesel powered with a remote operation system that the previous base commander had installed 3 years ago because he was tired of sending soldiers out in whiteout conditions to clear the access road at 2 in the morning. Nobody had ever told Evelyn about the remote system specifically, but she had found it during her first week at the base because she had read every equipment manual in the maintenance bay, and she had remembered it because that was the kind of information her brain kept. The details that seemed useless until they were absolutely essential. She found the remote control unit on the shelf where the manual said it would be. She sat down on a workbench in the cold, dark garage with the sounds of 92 people trying to figure out what they were fighting, and she started working out the timing. She needed the 2 assault teams, the main gate element and the power junction element, separated and confused before they could coordinate their breach. She needed them to commit to both approaches simultaneously to stretch their command attention across 2 separate problems, and then she needed to give them a 3rd problem that didn't fit their operational model. She thought it through. She did not rush. Rushing was how you made mistakes, and mistakes tonight were not something she could afford. Every round she fired would have to accomplish something specific. Every movement she made would have to mean something. She had 220 rounds left. She had fired 20 to disable the truck and the antenna and to convince the formations that she was multiple shooters, and she needed those rounds to last 8 hours because that was the minimum time for any kind of relief to reach her position if the transmission had gotten through, if someone had heard it, if someone cared enough to come. She wasn't sure anyone had heard it. She was less sure anyone would come, but she had a job. And the job was to hold this base for as long as she was standing for people who didn't know they needed her to. Rourke's voice came through the tactical receiver in her ear, clearer now, calling the assault elements forward. She heard the confidence in it, The confidence of a man who had resources and a plan, and who was beginning to suspect the plan would need adjusting, but not abandoning. Evelyn Cross chambered a fresh round, picked up the snowplow remote control, and allowed herself one single quiet breath. Then she went back to work. Outside, the two assault teams began to move toward their objectives, certain and coordinated and completely unaware that the person waiting for them had already been thinking 3 moves ahead for the past 20 minutes in the same focused, unhurried way she had always done, everything the way that officers and superiors had always mistaken for passivity, and which was in fact the most controlled and consequential form of aggression there is. The soldier everyone forgot had decided to become a garrison, and the night had barely even started. The snowplow hit the access road barrier at 43 miles per hour. Evelyn had timed it to the second. She had watched on the sensor display as Rourke's Team Alpha committed fully to the main gate approach, 60% of their force funneling down the eastern access road in a tight column, confident, now moving with the urgency of a unit that had been held up too long and was ready to finish what they came to do. Team Bravo was 40 seconds from the power junction on the south side. Both elements were committed. Neither could easily reverse. She triggered the snowplow remote from inside the vehicle garage, and 18,000 pounds of diesel steel went across the access road at an angle that a physics teacher would have appreciated, lodging itself between the concrete barrier on one side and the frozen embankment on the other, with a grinding screech of metal that she felt in her back teeth from 200 yards away. The road was completely and efficiently blocked. Team Alpha stopped moving. Team Bravo stopped moving. Because their radio net suddenly filled with confused voices and Rourke's sharp command to hold position, assess, report. Evelyn was already gone from the garage before the echo settled. She came up through the maintenance hatch behind the eastern barracks and moved along the wall in a low-run rifle, slung the remote control tucked into her vest. She had 45 seconds, maybe 60, before the confusion on the radio resolved into a new order. She used them. She reached the secondary electrical panel on the north wall of the command building and threw 3 specific breakers. Not the emergency power, she needed that, but the external floodlight circuits that she had already rewired that afternoon in the 20 minutes between her last radio attempt and the moment the sensors went amber. She had rewired them to cycle independently, to come on and go off in patterns that suggested deliberate control, multiple operators managing multiple sectors. The floodlights on the east wall blazed to life. From outside the perimeter, standing in the dark and the cold, what Rourke's people saw was the eastern face of the base suddenly lit up like someone had just decided to announce they were awake and watching. 3 separate light banks staggered, the kind of pattern that suggested coordinated positioning rather than a single switch. Multiple active positions on the east wall, one of Team Alpha's squad leaders reported. "They know we're here. They are staged and ready." "Of course they know we're here," Rourke said, and she heard the tightness in his voice for the first time. Something that wasn't quite frustration, but was getting there. "What I want to know is how many of them there are. Why is no one giving me a number?" Nobody gave him a number because nobody had one. That was Evelyn understood exactly where she needed to keep him. She moved to the Eastern Guard Tower, her 3rd time in that tower since this started, but she came at it from a different angle each time, emerging from a different door, because she had already assessed that there were at least 2 people in Rourke's force with scopes good enough to track movement, and she couldn't give them a pattern. The moment she became predictable, she became manageable, and managed was dead. From the tower, she looked out across the snowfield and assessed the damage. Team Alpha was reorganizing around the blocked road, and she could see in the way they moved, cautious, now spread out, using every piece of cover that the easy confidence of 90 minutes ago had been replaced by something more careful. That was good. Careful men took longer to act. Longer to act meant more time. She pressed the button on the pre-recorded radio transmitter she had set up before climbing the tower. It was one of 4 she had positioned around the base, small handheld units, loaded with 15-second audio clips. She had recorded herself using different cadences, different tones, trying to suggest different voices without being theatrical about it. The transmitter broadcast on a frequency she knew Rourke's tactical receivers would pick up because she had spent 30 minutes scanning his team's communications pattern and found the channel they were using for internal crosstalk. The recording said in a voice she had pitched lower than her own, "North sector clear. Confirm east wall has eyes on Team Alpha position. They've stopped moving on the access road." 30 seconds later, another transmitter, the one she had positioned near the motor pool, broadcast a different clip. Copy that. Holding fire until they commit. Let them come. She heard Rourke's voice on the tactical receiver cut through the chaos on his net. Everyone stop talking. Listen. She could almost feel him processing it. The coordinated communications between positions. The deliberate lighting pattern. The blocked road. The selective targeting of vehicles and equipment rather than personnel. He was building a picture in his head, and the picture had multiple defenders in it, organized defenders. Defenders who were calm enough to execute a coordinated delay strategy while absorbing the shock of his assault. She needed to keep that picture intact for as long as she possibly could. Alpha Team, Rourke said very quietly, do not approach the gate. Hold your position and wait. Sir, we're sitting in the open, treat them. Then find cover, we are reassessing. Evelyn exhaled. She had bought another 20 minutes minimum. Maybe 30 if she played the next sequence right. She climbed down from the tower and started thinking about the power junction. Team Bravo had not moved since the snowplow incident. They were sitting 200 yards south of the perimeter fence, 9 people waiting for orders. Their objective was the external power junction box that fed the emergency generator system, a legitimate tactical target because a base with no power was a base where the floodlights went out and the sensor network died and the relay console went dark. She understood why it was on Rourke's list. She also understood that she could not let them reach it. The power junction was outside the fence line, which meant she couldn't physically block access to it the way she had blocked the access road. She could shoot at the team if they moved, but 9 people were too many to hold back with rifle fire alone from a single position without exposing herself completely, and the moment she exposed herself to Team Bravo Alpha was going to move on the gate. She thought about it for 11 seconds. She counted the seconds deliberately because she had learned long ago that the impulse to act immediately in a crisis was almost always wrong, and that 11 seconds of clear thinking was worth more than an hour of reactive movement. The power junction ran on a separate cable from the primary generator feed. She could not disable the junction itself without also cutting the relay power, but she could make reaching the junction very unpleasant. She went to the maintenance bay. She found what she was looking for on the 3rd shelf, 2 canisters of fire-suppressant foam compound, the kind used in the vehicle garage for chemical fire response. Heavy pressurized, and when released in cold air, capable of creating an extremely dense white cloud at ground level. She carried both canisters to the south fence, staying low and in shadow, moving with the patient efficiency of someone who has accepted that urgency and speed are not the same thing. She set the canisters against the outside of the fence, rigged the release valves to a simple tripwire, running along the most direct approach line to the power junction, and moved back to a position where she could cover the area without being seen. Team Bravo received their new orders at 7:58 p.m. She heard Rourke tell them to move on the junction carefully and to send a point man first to assess the approach. The point man made it about 60 feet before he walked into the tripwire. The suppressant foam went off both canisters at once, which was more dramatic than she had anticipated. The cloud was immediate and dense and spread along the ground in the point man's reaction. A shout, a stumble backward, a frantic call on the radio communicated to the rest of Team Bravo that they had walked into something and they had no idea what it was. Bravo report, what is your status? We've got it, some kind of gas, some kind of chemical deployment along the south approach. Point man is down. He's up. It's not. I don't know what it is, sir, but the approach is compromised. It's suppressant foam, Rourke said after a pause, and she heard in his voice the specific quality of a man recalibrating. It's foam. They're buying time with building supplies. Pull back, go around. Going around added 12 minutes. She heard him recalculating on his net, redirecting Bravo to the alternate approach on the southeast side, and she was already moving to cover that angle. 8:14 p.m. She had been at this for 43 minutes and she was starting to feel it. Not fear, fear had been there since the beginning. Sitting in her chest like a stone, she had decided not to look at directly, but the physical cost of moving continuously in extreme cold, staying low, managing the mental load of tracking 3 separate approach vectors while monitoring radio traffic and maintaining the illusion of multiple defenders. Her hands were steady, But her breathing was working harder than she wanted, and she made a note of that the way her father had taught her to make notes of physical data during exertion, not with alarm, just with awareness. Know your body, know your limits, know how much further you can push before you start making mistakes. She assessed she could sustain this pace for another 2 hours, maybe 3 before decision quality started to degrade. The temperature would drop another 6 degrees before midnight. She had consumed approximately 8% of her ammunition. The relay console was still active. She had no idea if anyone had heard her transmission. She decided very deliberately not to think about that. The transmission had gone out or it hadn't. Someone had received it or no one had. She could not control any of that from inside this perimeter. What she could control was this fence line, this access road, this darkness in the 92 people who had made the mistake of assuming they were walking into something empty. Rourke's voice came through the receiver again, and he sounded different this time. Less reactive, more settled. The voice of a man who had stopped being surprised and started being methodical. All elements, listen up. We are adjusting the assessment. We do not know how many defenders are in that installation. Could be 4, could be 12, could be less. What we know is this: they are not trying to kill us, they are trying to delay us. That means they are expecting reinforcement. Our window is closing. I want a full coordinated assault on all 3 approach vectors in 30 minutes. Everyone commits simultaneously. We accept that some of us will take fire. We accept that the approach is going to hurt. But 90 of us do not get stopped by a delayed response unit. We move in 30 minutes. Evelyn heard this and felt something shift in the calculation. 30 minutes. She owned this would come the moment when patience ran out on the other side and pure mass replaced strategy. She had bought 43 minutes of delay through deception and terrain knowledge and the psychological advantage of the unknown. She had maybe 30 more before 92 people decided that the unknown was an acceptable price. She needed to change the psychological equation before that clock ran out. She needed to make this personal. She climbed back to the Western Guard Tower, which she had not used yet tonight. That was deliberate. She had been saving a fresh firing position for exactly this moment, and she keyed the base external PA system, which still had power, which could be heard clearly across the snowfield and into the tree line in the cold air that carried sound like a wire. She spoke into the PA microphone clearly and without performance. She did not try to sound like multiple people. She just spoke. Whoever is commanding out there, I know you're reassessing. You should be. You've been at this for 43 minutes and you haven't made it through the fence. I want you to think very carefully about why. You brought 92 trained people to an evacuated base and you still can't take it. And the answer isn't that there's a platoon in here. You know the answer. You've been working toward it for 20 minutes. I want you to sit with that. Silence on the snowfield. Then Rourke's voice, not on the radio, but through a handheld speaker of his own, directed at the base. You're alone. I'm enough, Evelyn said. You are one person. I have 92. You had easier math an hour ago. She heard something she did not expect. A short, low sound from the direction of the tree line. It might have been a cough. It might have been someone on Rourke's team laughing involuntarily, the way people sometimes laugh when something is so unexpected that the body reacts before the mind does. What's your name, soldier? Rourke asked. She considered that. She decided it didn't cost her anything. Cross, she said. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Cross. Another pause. Longer this time. Who left you here, Sergeant Cross? She did not answer that. Somebody made a decision, Rourke said, and his voice had changed again, lower now. Almost conversational, the voice of a man who had decided to try a different approach. Somebody looked at a manifest and decided you could wait. You know that. You're standing in an empty base in the middle of nowhere and somewhere warm. Right now, the people who were supposed to get you out are sitting at a table and probably not thinking about you at all. Does that feel like something worth dying for? She heard him. She let the words land because refusing to hear a thing didn't neutralize it. He was right about one thing. Somebody had made a decision. She had known that since 6:59 p.m. when she walked out into the cold and registered the silence. She had known it the way you know something you've been trying not to know all at once, with a completeness that doesn't leave room for alternative explanations. 30 minutes, she said into the PA. I heard your timeline. You should know that 30 minutes from now, this relay console will be encrypted to a protocol that only command-level access can reverse. By the time you get through my fence, everything you came here for will be locked behind a key that I don't have, and you definitely don't. That was not entirely true. The encryption would take longer to initiate than 30 minutes. But the statement bought her something more valuable than time. It bought her confusion because Rourke didn't know which parts of it were true, and a commander who is managing uncertainty about the objective cannot fully commit his force. She's bluffing, she heard someone say on the radio net. Maybe, Rourke said. Or maybe she just told us we're running out of time. Move up the timeline, 20 minutes. All elements. She exhaled slowly. She had made it worse. She had intended to make it worse. Pressure applied correctly creates mistakes. But the acknowledgement of that didn't make the next 20 minutes feel spacious. She thought about what her father would say right now. Robert Cross had been a man of few words in a crisis. He had told her once when she was 14 and had fallen from a rock face during a training climb and was sitting at the base with a sprained wrist in genuine terror on her face that the most dangerous thing a person could do in a bad situation was to think about how bad the situation was. Focus gets narrower as pressure gets higher, he had told her, crouching down to her level, not making her feel small, but making her feel seen. That's not weakness. That's the brain protecting itself. You use that. You get very small. You think about the next thing, just the next thing, not everything, one thing. She thought about this next thing. The next thing was the gate. Rourke's coordinated assault would put pressure on all three approaches simultaneously, but the gate was the most direct route to the communications building. Alpha Team would drive for the gate, accept whatever fire came their way, and try to get enough people through the fence that she couldn't cover the relay building and the perimeter at the same time. She went back through the maintenance tunnel, moving fast now, and came up in the command building. And she went to the emergency equipment locker that every base had and that most soldiers forgot about because emergencies of this specific variety were supposed to be impossible. She found 4 signal flares, a handheld spotlight, and a box of road flares designed for vehicle accidents. She arranged the road flares along the main approach corridor from the gate to the communications building, timed to ignite in sequence with a remote trigger she rigged from a simple relay switch. She positioned the handheld spotlight in the window of the building across from the gate, facing outward on a timer that would activate it at the moment she needed it most. Then she went back to the roof of the communications building and lay flat rifle extended toward the gate and waited. 8:38 p.m. They came all at once, and it was the most disciplined thing she had seen all night. Rourke had his people moving in coordinated rushes, 3 elements hitting 3 points of the perimeter simultaneously, and she had anticipated it. But the reality of 90 people committing at once was different from the anticipation. The snowfield filled with movement. Radio traffic spiked and then went quiet. Command had ordered radio silence on the approach, which meant they had rehearsed this specific scenario. Quiet approach under fire, which meant Rourke had operational experience she needed to respect. She took one shot, at the lock assembly on the gate itself, which she had already weakened from the inside with a cutting tool so that the shot didn't need to penetrate anything. It needed to weld the mechanism in place, and it did, seizing the gate shut in a way that would take heavy bolt cutters or a vehicle impact to override. Then she triggered the spotlight. The handheld spotlight she had positioned facing outward hit the snowfield with the concentrated intensity of something twice its size, and every one of Rourke's people in the gate approach froze for a half-second blinded. Half a second, long enough, she moved. She went down through the hatch, across the tunnel, up through the motor pool, and she positioned herself in the second-story window of the barracks building that overlooked the southern fence line where Bravo Team was cutting through the chain link. She did not fire at the people cutting the fence. She fired at the ground 2 feet ahead of the cut, once, twice, 3 times tight grouping, precise enough to communicate that whoever was behind that rifle could put the next round anywhere they chose. Team Bravo, stop cutting. She's in the South Barracks, someone reported on the radio net. She was already gone. Back through the tunnel, up into the eastern tower. One shot at the bolt cutters a Team Alpha member was using on the gate mechanism. The tool spun out of his hands and he pulled back from the gate with a sound she could hear from 200 yards. Back down, tunnel, north wall. One shot this time at an antenna array. One of Rourke's people was trying to position a jamming device. She realized the kind designed to overwhelm the relay signal, which meant her encryption bluff had actually worked. They were trying to neutralize the relay remotely because they were genuinely afraid she would lock it down before they could get to it. She destroyed the jamming array with 2 rounds. She had used 11 rounds in the past 7 minutes. She counted them precisely because she counted everything. She had 209 left. 9:02 p.m. The assault had been running for nearly 90 minutes and Rourke had not breached the fence. She was crouching in the maintenance bay back against the cold wall, doing a rapid assessment of her own physical condition. Her hands were cold despite the gloves, the kind of deep cold that settles into joints and makes fine motor control unreliable if you let it progress. She'd been burning calories faster than she'd eaten them, and she needed to address that, so she pulled a protein bar from her vest and ate it methodically without pleasure. The way her father had taught her to eat in the field, fuel is fuel, sentiment is for later. Her shoulder hurt, not the wounded shoulder that came later, her right shoulder from the sustained position, shooting from the weight of the rifle in cold that made every movement cost more than it should. She did the range of motion check her sports medicine instructor had taught her in training, found it acceptable, filed the information. She was holding. She was genuinely against every mathematical probability holding a military installation against 92 people. But she could hear something new in Rourke's radio traffic. The casual confidence of the first hour was completely gone. The recalibrated, methodical certainty of the second hour was fraying. What was replacing it was something quieter and more dangerous, a specific kind of focused anger that she recognized, the anger of a tactically capable person who has been made to look foolish and is done tolerating it. White Sentinel, one of Rourke's team leaders, said on the radio, and the name stopped her cold. They had given her a name, not her name, a name they had invented, which meant she had become something to them. Not an obstacle, not a unit, but a specific presence and entity. They were developing a psychology about which was simultaneously a tactical advantage for her and a warning sign. Rourke had started thinking about her as a person. People were solvable in ways that obstacles weren't. The White Sentinel is working the tunnel network, the team leader continued. She's using it to simulate multiple positions. If we can identify all the tunnel access points and cover them simultaneously, we can predict her movement. She heard Rourke absorb this. Do we have a map of the tunnel network? Working on it. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes. She had 20 minutes before they mapped her mobility. She sat in the cold of the maintenance bay and felt the weight of the night pressing down on her for the first time, not fear, exactly, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been operating at maximum capacity for 90 minutes with no certainty of relief. She was 2 hours in. The earliest any response could realistically arrive if her transmission had been received and immediately acted on was 4 hours from now, possibly 6. She had held them for 90 minutes through deception and terrain knowledge, but she was running out of novel responses. They were learning her patterns. In 20 minutes, they would map her tunnels. She needed a new kind of disruption. She needed to change the nature of the problem. She thought about it for 30 seconds. 30 deliberate seconds sitting still in the dark, letting her mind work without forcing it, the way her father had taught her to approach hard problems. Don't push. Open up. Let the answer surface. The answer, when it came, was simple and somewhat ridiculous, and possibly the only thing that would work. She went to the base's central server room, which still had power. She found the pre-recorded emergency announcement system, the one designed to guide evacuation procedures with the calm female voice that could be directed to play through speakers distributed across the entire installation. She did not play the evacuation announcements. She accessed the custom message recording system and spent 3 minutes recording 4 separate audio clips, using every variation in tone and cadence she could manage without sounding theatrical. Then she set them to play on a rotating cycle through different speakers across the base. Not simultaneously. In sequence, as if different people in different positions were communicating through the PA system, coordinating, checking in, reporting status. The effect from outside the perimeter was of a fully operational garrison running systematic communication checks. She heard the reaction on the radio net within 40 seconds. Sir, we have multiple voices on the PA, at least 4 distinct individuals. They are conducting active communication drills. Rourke's response was not immediate. When it came, his voice was very flat. That's not communication drills. That's a recording. Sir, how can you be? Because I've been listening to one person fight my entire unit for the past 90 minutes, and I know what one person sounds like when they're running out of options. A pause. But it doesn't matter if it's a recording. Everyone in this unit who can hear that PA is going to hesitate because they can't be sure, and she knows that. She did know that. She had counted on it. Find the tunnel access points, Rourke said. Seal them. Then we go in, or 23 p.m. She was back on the roof of the communications building when the second full assault began, and this time it was different. This time Rourke had pulled his people back far enough that she couldn't effectively target them without exposing herself completely, and then push them forward in rolling rushes that were too fast and too many to cover from a single position. She fired twice at the main gate approach, twice at the south fence breach point, and then she heard someone behind her, inside the perimeter, and she understood that they had found a tunnel entrance she had not blocked in time. She rolled off the roof access panel and dropped to the lower level and pressed herself against the wall of the corridor and listened. Footsteps. One person, maybe two, moving carefully, checking rooms. She had 7 rounds in the current magazine and a full magazine ready. She had her sidearm, and she had her knife, and she had something more important than any of those. She had 3 years of walking this building in the dark, learning every room, every door, every corner. The way a person learns a house they've lived in long enough that they could navigate it blind. She moved through this building with no lights on from memory, placing her feet with the deliberate quiet of someone who was done with the illusion of having numbers on her side and had gone back to the most fundamental truth of this night. She knew this ground and they did not. She reached the corridor junction ahead of the 2 intruders, pressed herself into an alcove, and listened to them come closer. Clear left, one of them said very quietly. Clear right, the other answered. She reached past the corner and found the fire alarm pull station that she had specifically noted 3 weeks ago because it was in a strange location mounted on the inside corner, where it was almost invisible, the kind of thing you noticed if you were paying attention and missed if you weren't. She pulled it. The alarm was deafening, immediate. The intruders reacted exactly the way humans react to an unexpected loud noise in the dark. They flinched, both of them. 2 full-body flinches that lasted less than a second, but enough. She was through the door behind them before they could reorient, moving fast down the corridor toward the relay room, putting distance between herself and their position. And when she reached the relay room, she threw the deadbolt and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She could hear shouting outside. The fire alarm was still screaming. On the radio net, chaos, multiple teams asking for status. Rourke telling them to hold the 2 intruders. She just evaded reporting contact, lost contact, requesting guidance. She pressed the transmitter again. One more time, she gave coordinates, she gave the time. She gave the composition of the attacking force and the current perimeter status. And she said quietly into the static, the thing she had not allowed herself to say before. Or I am injured. I am running low on ammunition. I need backup at this location. If anyone can hear this, I need you to come now. She did not expect an answer. She got one. It was faint, fractured by the cyber attack interference, barely audible through the static. But it was a human voice and it said one word: received. She sat with that word in the dark relay room with the fire alarm screaming and 92 people trying to find her in the night. And she felt something move through her that was not exactly hope. She had been too disciplined to let herself hope, but was the closest thing to it she had allowed herself all night. One word: received. She reloaded. She checked her sidearm. She took stock. She had been alone on this base for 2 hours and 44 minutes. She had not let them through the fence in a coordinated way. She had not let them touch the relay. And now someone on the other end of a radio had heard her voice and sent one word back into the dark. She thought about the people in the 3 communities that relay was serving. She thought about them asleep right now, or watching television or sitting with their families, with no idea that there was a woman in a locked room in an empty military base keeping a specific kind of disaster from reaching their lives. She pulled herself to her feet. She had never intended to be a legend. She had never needed anyone to know her name. Her father had built her for exactly this, the moment when no one was watching, when no one was coming, when the only thing between a bad outcome and a worse one was a single person who had decided without audience and without applause that standing was the only acceptable choice. Rourke knocked on the relay room door. Literally knocked. 3 deliberate knocks, as if he were arriving at a colleague's office. Sergeant Cross, he said through the door, and his voice was calm in the specific way of someone who has stopped performing and started being honest. I know it's just you. I've known for the last hour. I want you to understand something. I respect what you've done tonight. Genuinely. I've never seen anything like it. But it's time to end this. Open the door. She did not open the door. I'm not opening this door, she said. And every minute you stand in that corridor, you are 1 minute closer to the moment this becomes considerably worse for you. Reinforcements, Rourke said. It wasn't a question. You do the math. A long silence. How long ago did your transmission go out? She didn't answer. It doesn't matter, he said finally. Even if someone heard it, even if they're coming right now, the roads are difficult and the weather is getting worse, and your command structure spent tonight pretending you didn't exist. The people who should have protected you already made their decision about your value, Sergeant. I'm asking you to make a smarter one. She thought about that. She genuinely thought about it because he was making a point that deserved to be thought about, that had real weight behind it, that touched something she had been carrying since 6:59 p.m. When she walked out into this cold and understood what had been done to her. Someone had made a decision about her value. Someone had drawn a line through her name and gone to sleep. I'm not defending them, she said through the door. I'm not doing this for the people who left me. I'm doing this for the people behind this line. The ones who had nothing to do with any of this. The communities this relay serves. The families who have no idea what tonight is. Silence. Open the door, Sergeant. Get away from my door, Rourke. Another silence, different this time. Heavier. How do you know my name, he said. I've been listening to your radio net for 3 hours, she said. I know your name and your call signs and your team structure and your operational timeline. I know you've rescheduled this assault twice, and I know why both times. I know things about how you run a unit that I am going to make sure are in the briefing I give to every intelligence officer who debriefed me after tonight. A very long pause. You're going to survive this, Rourke said, and it was not entirely clear whether he was admiring that or troubled by it. Yes, Evelyn Cross said, I am. She heard him move away from the door. She heard him on the radio, his voice low and controlled, and she heard him say something she filed carefully in the part of her mind that tracked threat indicators. Change of plan. We go through the wall, not the door, the wall. She looked at the relay room. She looked at the walls. She thought about what was on the other side of each of them. She started moving furniture. The night was barely past its midpoint. She had held them for 2 hours and 44 minutes. She was going to need to hold them for several more. Her shoulder ached. Her hands were cold. Her ammunition was dwindling. And somewhere very far away, someone who had said received was either coming or they weren't. She would hold either way. She had never needed anyone to see it, to know it was the right thing to do. She moved the last piece of furniture against the east wall and sat down behind it, rifle ready, and waited for the night to show her what it had left. The wall exploded inward, not with a brass charge. They didn't use one, and she had been listening carefully enough to know they didn't have one in their initial kit, which meant the sound that shook the relay room at 10:11 p.m. was a vehicle impact. One of Rourke's people had driven something heavy. She guessed the second snowplow, the one she hadn't commandeered, the one parked near the south utility lot directly into the exterior wall of the communications building. And the structural damage was immediate and significant. The furniture she had stacked against the east wall shifted. The overhead light, one of the last functioning lights in the building, flickered and went out. The relay console threw emergency battery indicators in red across its face, casting the room in a dim, urgent glow. She was already moving before the dust settled. She had anticipated a wall breach as a possibility. What she had not anticipated was the specific wall. They chose the east wall, which put them between her and the maintenance tunnel entrance, which was the one exit she had been counting on if the relay room became untenable. Rourke had mapped the tunnel access points faster than she expected. He had used the breach to cut off her retreat rather than to enter directly, which meant he understood her mobility strategy and was now systematically dismantling it. That was the moment she understood she was not dealing with a disorganized force that had gotten lucky. Silas Rourke was genuinely operationally good. She moved to the north wall of the relay room, the one that shared a boundary with the server corridor, and she listened. She could hear 2 teams moving in the building now, one through the breach in the east wall, one entering through the main door on the west side, which they had finally cut through. They were coordinating their movement through the building in a classic pincer pattern designed to drive her into the center and eliminate her options one room at a time. She had 4 rooms left with viable exits before she was cornered. She thought about the next thing, just the next thing. She moved north through the server corridor, stayed low, crossed the junction without showing herself, and came up behind the junction box she had noted on her first day at Fort Resolute, the one that controlled the building's internal security shutters, the heavy steel panels designed to seal critical sections of the building in the event of a security emergency. Nobody had ever used them in the building's operational history. They were a contingency for a situation that was not supposed to happen, which was why Evelyn had read the manual and nobody else had. She threw the master switch. The shutters came down with a sound like something geological, a deep resonant clang that she felt in her sternum, steel panels dropping simultaneously across 6 doorways in the communications building ceiling sections from each other. The 2 teams entering from opposite directions were suddenly in separate sealed portions of the building with no line of communication between them and no easy path to each other. She heard one team leader's voice go up through the wall. "Shutters are down. We are sealed in Sector 2, requesting guidance." Rourke's response was tight and immediate. "Hold your position. Do not attempt to force the shutters." Team Charlie moved to the exterior and find the shutter override panel. She was already at the shutter override panel, which was in her section, and she had already pulled the control board out of the wall housing and cut the bypass wire with her knife. The shutters were staying down. Whatever Rourke sent to the exterior override panel would find a control board that no longer responded. She had bought herself another window. 10 minutes, maybe 12, before they cut through a shutter manually or found an approach she hadn't blocked. But she was in the center section of the building now, with 2 sealed teams on either side and Rourke's command element still outside, and her ammunition was at 171 rounds, and she was very, very tired. She sat down against the wall in the server corridor for exactly 45 seconds. She allowed herself that. 45 seconds to breathe, to eat another protein bar, to assess her physical condition with the same clear-eyed neutrality her father had taught her, and to make an honest accounting. Her right shoulder was at about 70%. Manageable. Her hands were functional, but she could feel the cold settling into the joints in a way that told her fine motor precision would start degrading within the next 2 hours if the temperature inside the building continued to drop, and it was dropping because the vehicle impact had compromised the east wall's insulation and cold air was pouring through the gap. Her mind was clear. That was the most important thing, and she tested it deliberately, running a quick inventory of everything she knew about the building. Layout, the tunnel access points, the position of both sealed teams, the exterior perimeter status, Rourke's likely next move. It all came back cleanly. She was tired, but she was functional. 45 seconds, she said quietly to herself, the way her father used to give her a time limit for rest during training climbs. Time. She got up. 10:31 p.m. Rourke had been quiet on the radio net for 11 minutes, and that silence was more alarming than anything he had said all night. A commanding officer who stops talking has either given up or is thinking very hard, and she did not believe Silas Rourke was the kind of man who gave up. She positioned herself in the northeast corner of the server corridor. Behind a equipment rack she had turned on its side and watched the sealed shutter on the north end of the corridor. She could hear someone working on it from the other side. Rhythmic impacts, the sound of a pry tool being applied to the seal edge. They were going to get through eventually. The shutters were designed to resist a lot of things, but not sustain manual assault with the right tools. She estimated 6 minutes before they cut through. She used 4 of those minutes to rig the remaining signal flares along the corridor floor in a pattern she had worked out in her head, connected to a single pull trigger she set at the north end of the corridor near the shutter. Then she moved south to the farthest sealed section from the breach, the one room in the building where the relay console's secondary terminal still had active display. And she did something she had been putting off because she did not want to admit the situation had become necessary. So began the encryption initialization sequence on the relay console, not because she was giving up, because she needed Rourke to believe she might be close to completing it, which would force him to commit resources and attention to stopping it, which would split his focus. It was a gambit, expensive and risky, because if she ran the encryption too far and then lost access to the console before she could reverse it, she would accomplish Rourke's mission for him. The relay would become inaccessible even to command. She started the sequence and then stopped it at 30%. Set it to display the progress bar on every screen in the building that still had power, which was 3 screens, one of which was visible through an interior window that faced the sealed shutter. Rourke's team was cutting through. She waited. Rourke's voice cut through the radio net 40 seconds later. No longer calm. I need eyes on that relay console right now. If she finishes that encryption sequence, everything we came here for goes dark. Everyone redirects to the relay room. Now. She heard the shift in movement through the walls. Bodies redirecting. Teams that had been methodically clearing the building, suddenly changing direction and priority, pushing toward the relay room, which was in the south section, sealed behind 2 shutters, which meant they had to go around the building exterior and enter from the south breach point, which meant she had approximately 4 minutes before they were stacked up at the relay room door. She was not in the relay room. She moved north. The shutter at the north end of the server corridor gave way at 10:43 p.m. and the 2 members of Rourke's team who pushed through it first hit the pull trigger at knee height, and the 3 signal flares went off simultaneously in the corridor. Not as weapons, but as pure, sudden, overwhelming light in a space where they had been moving in near darkness. Both of them stopped. Both of them covered their eyes with their arms for 1.5 seconds. She was past them before they could reorient, moving through the gap in the shutter into the sealed north section and out through the north exterior door into the Alaskan cold. The temperature hit her like a physical impact. She had been inside for long enough that the cold was a genuine shock, and she registered it and did not stop moving because stopping was the one thing she could not afford. She came around the exterior of the building, and she heard it before she saw it, a sharp crack from somewhere above and to her right, and then a line of fire opened across her left shoulder that was instantly, unmistakably, completely different from any discomfort she had felt all night. She had been shot. She knew it immediately and completely. There was no confusion. The round had come from an elevated position. One of Rourke's people had gone to the top of the vehicle bay roof covering the north exterior approach, anticipating exactly the exit she had used. It was a good shot from a difficult angle in poor light. She registered the professionalism of it, even as she registered the fact that her left arm had stopped responding normally, and she was leaving a trail she couldn't afford to leave. She got around the corner of the building and then pressed against the wall and did the injury assessment with her right hand, fast and clinical, the way the Army had trained her and the way her father had trained her before that. The round had passed through the outer edge of the shoulder-high catching muscle and possibly clipping the joint. Not arterial. She could tell because she was still thinking clearly, and the blood, though real and significant, was not the catastrophic kind. She had maybe 30 minutes of effective function before blood loss started meaningfully degrading her capacity. Less if she couldn't seal the wound. She had a trauma kit in her vest. She had put it there herself, had carried it for 3 years without needing it, had thought occasionally that it was the kind of preparation that pessimists made. She pulled it open with her right hand. She sealed the wound with what she had. It was not a clean job. She was working one-handed in the dark against a wall in minus 24 degrees with people looking for her 30 feet away. It was good enough. It would hold long enough. She stood up. Her left arm came back to about 50% she could grip, but not with full strength, could not manage the rifle bolt reliably with that hand, which meant she shifted to single-handed operation and shortened her engagement range mentally and moved forward. She had been shot. She was still standing. Her father would not have been surprised. 10:58 p.m. The word received had come back to her twice more since the first time, each transmission a little clearer, a little closer. Captain Warren, she recognized his voice on the third attempt. Thin and fractured through the interference, but unmistakably his had said 4 words, "We are coming cross." She had not responded. She didn't want to waste the battery on the transmitter or give away her current position. But she had heard him. She had counted the hours. She did the math on road conditions and distance, and the fact that Warren was the kind of man who did not say he was coming unless he was already in a vehicle on the way. She estimated 2 hours, possibly 3. She needed to hold this base with one functional arm and dwindling ammunition for 2 more hours. She had held it for 3.5 already. She climbed to the roof of the motor pool using the exterior ladder on the west side, moving slowly because her left arm was unreliable on the rungs. But moving and from the roof, she had a clear line of sight across the vehicle yard to the communications building and could see the chaos her relay room gambit had created. Rourke had pulled nearly everyone to the south section of the building, stacking them on the relay room door, which was sealed and empty, while she was standing on a roof 200 yards away, watching them. She put one round through the antenna of the radio vehicle Rourke was using as his command post. The radio net went chaotic immediately. She heard Rourke actually shout for the first time all night, and the sound of it told her something important about what the past 3 hours had cost him. Find her, stop worrying about the building, find her and put her down. Sir, the relay room is empty. She played us, she's outside, find her. Recalibration. She had 30 seconds before they began a systematic exterior search. She used 20 of them to fire twice more once at the communications vehicle they were using as a signal relay for their own jamming equipment. Once at the ground-mounted antenna array they had set up on the north side of the perimeter after their first one was destroyed. Both went dark. Their communications were degraded again. Not destroyed, they had redundancy. She had learned that about them over the past 3 hours. But degraded enough that coordinating a search was going to be messy. She climbed down the west side of the motor pool roof, one arm moving slower than she wanted, and she felt the reality of her wound for the first time as a limitation rather than just a data point. The cold was interfering with the seal. She could feel it. She needed somewhere to stop for 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds to reassess the seal and do something about the blood loss that was making her thinking slightly slower at the edges than it had been an hour ago. Not impaired, not dangerous yet, but slower and slower was a thing she could not afford. She went to the vehicle maintenance pit under the floor of the motor pool, a below-grade service area where mechanics worked on vehicle undercarriages, accessible through a hatch in the floor, that she had used as a shortcut twice tonight but never as a hiding place. She dropped down into it and pulled the hatch closed above her and sat in the absolute dark with the sounds of Rourke's people beginning their exterior search moving through the walls around her. She worked on the wound seal by touch. She had done wilderness first aid in the dark as a training exercise, not because the Army required it, because she had signed up for the optional course when she was 22, because she liked knowing things other people didn't think to learn. The seal she applied was better than the first one. Not good, better. She thought about her father's hands, teaching her to tend a wound, the way he taught her everything with patience, with precision, with the steady certainty that doing a thing correctly was always worth the time it took. You're going to be fine, she told herself quietly in the dark, using the exact cadence he would have used. You're going to be fine, get up. 22 p.m. She had been in the maintenance pit for 19 minutes when she heard Rourke's voice directly above her, standing on the motor pool floor. I know she's been using the maintenance structures, he was saying to someone. His voice was close enough that she could hear the exhaustion in it, not weakness, but the specific flatness of a man who has been operating at high intensity for 4 hours and is running on discipline. Check the pits, check the tunnels, check every crawl space. She's injured. She can't keep moving the way she has been. She'll stop somewhere. When she stops, we find her. 3 feet above her head, 3 feet of steel flooring between them. She did not breathe. She did not move. She held herself with the absolute stillness that she had learned as a child and refined as a soldier, and that was in this moment the most important physical skill she possessed. She heard footsteps on the floor above, moving toward the hatch. She had her sidearm ready. If the hatch opened, she would fire upward. She would have a split second of advantage from the unexpected direction, and she would use it. She did not want to. She had gone the entire night without putting a round into a human being, and she had done it deliberately because she was not a killer. She was a soldier, and soldiers made distinctions that other people thought were artificial, but which were in her understanding the entire point. But she would do what the situation required. The footsteps stopped. Nothing under the vehicles, a voice said. Checking the hatch, it's sealed from above, sir. If she went in there, she sealed herself in. She didn't seal herself in, Rourke said. She's not the type. Keep moving. She let out the breath she had been holding in a controlled, silent stream. She waited 4 more minutes after the footsteps receded before she moved. 11:44 p.m. She came up through the motor pool hatch into a building that was empty. Rourke had pulled everyone outside for the search, which was the one thing she had not expected him to do. She had anticipated him leaving a team inside to hold the communications building, but he had made the calculation that she was more dangerous outside, which was true, and that her exterior capture was more urgent than interior defense, which was also arguably true. What he had not accounted for was that she would go back inside. She moved through the communications building with her rifle slung. She needed both hands free for what she was about to do, and her left hand was at 30% now, but 30% was enough, and she sat down at the relay console secondary terminal, and she canceled the encryption initialization sequence. Then she pulled up the full relay diagnostic interface, the one that required a security clearance to access, and that she had a security clearance to access because she was the assigned communications specialist, and someone had gotten that part of the paperwork right, even if they had gotten everything else wrong. She ran a full diagnostic. She pushed the relay signal to maximum broadcast strength, which it was not normally operated at because maximum strength accelerated component wear and command frowned on the maintenance costs. She did not care about maintenance costs. She pushed the signal as high as it would go, and she keyed the emergency broadcast protocol, and she sent everything she had: position status, force composition, her own physical condition, the current state of the installation in a compressed burst transmission on the military emergency frequency. Then she sat back and waited to see if the night had anything left to throw at her. It did. Midnight, Rourke found the relay room. Not because she had been careless. She had not been careless. She had gone back inside, understanding that he would search inward eventually, but because she had run out of unexpected moves and he had finally, after 4.5 hours, mapped her completely. He knew the building. He knew the tunnel network. He knew her firing positions, her approach patterns, her tactical principles. He had been building a model of her all night, and the model was now accurate enough to be dangerous. She heard him in the corridor outside the relay room. Not his team. Him. His footsteps had a particular cadence she had learned over the past hours of listening to him move, a slight emphasis on the left foot that came from an old injury in the right knee. The kind of thing you stopped noticing in yourself long ago, but that other people could map if they paid attention. Sergeant Cross, his voice through the door, very close, different from the last time he had stood outside this door. The previous time had been strategic. He had been making an argument, trying a psychological approach. This time his voice had the quality of someone who has stopped trying to manage a situation and is simply present in it. I know you're in there. I know you're injured. I know you've been running for 4.5 hours on one arm and whatever you had in those vest pockets. I'm not going to pretend I'm not impressed, because I am. I genuinely am. She did not respond. I also know, he continued, that my team is about to cut through this door, and when they do, you and I are going to be in the same room, and I don't want that to go badly for you. You've done something remarkable tonight. You deserve to walk out of here. She thought about what he was not saying. He was not saying surrender. He was not offering terms or conditions. He was speaking in the language of one professional acknowledging another, which was a sophisticated and effective approach because it was half sincere. She could hear the sincerity. She could also hear the tactic inside it. You came here for the relay, she said. Walk me through what you actually plan to do with it. A pause, as if he was deciding how honest to be. Redirect traffic, he said. Intercept communications. Create a window where we control the information flowing through this sector, long enough to move certain things certain places without military interference. People, she said. You were going to move people. Assets, he said. People, she repeated. And the 3 communities this relay serves lose their emergency coverage during that window. Acceptable collateral, he said. And the clinical flatness of those 2 words told her everything she needed to know about the distance between them. That's why I'm still in this room, she said. The cutting started 30 seconds later. She heard the high whine of a rotary tool working on the door hinges, the kind of sound that meant she had approximately 6 minutes before the door came off its frame. 6 minutes. She looked at the relay console. She looked at the room around her. She made a set of decisions very quickly, with the focused clarity that she had found was available to her in the worst moments. Not calm, not peace, but a specific kind of bright precision that came from having burned through everything except what mattered. She pulled a chair in front of the console and sat down and began typing. She was not running the encryption. She was writing. She was writing a complete operational report. Everything she knew about Black Summit's force composition, their tactical approach, Their communications protocols, their jamming equipment, their command structure, Rourke's operational decision patterns. Everything she had observed and cataloged over the past 4.5 hours. She typed one-handed fast, with the muscle memory of someone who had written field reports in bad conditions before. She compressed it and pushed it through the relay's data transmission function and sent it to Central Command's secure intake address, because even if they got into this room and destroyed the relay console, that document was in the secure system now, and there was nothing Rourke could do about it. She heard him on the other side of the door listening to the typing. "What are you doing?" he said. "Writing a report," she said. "About tonight. About you, about your team, about your equipment, your protocols, your command patterns, and everything I've been able to infer about your operational funding and oversight from 4.5 hours of listening to how you run a unit." Silence, a long one. "You're going to make it very difficult for us to do this kind of thing again," he said. "That's the idea. I could stop the cutting right now, walk away, pretend tonight never happened." "You could try," she said, "but that report is already sent." The cutting continued. 12:31 a.m. The door came off at 12:31 a.m. and Silas Rourke walked through it alone, and he stopped when he saw her. She was sitting in the chair in front of the console with her rifle across her knees, her left arm immobilized against her body, her white hair backlit by the red emergency indicators. Her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has accepted the situation completely and is simply waiting to see what the situation decides to do about it. She looked exhausted. She looked injured. She looked like someone who had been fighting alone for 5 hours in the Alaskan dark. She did not look like someone who was going to move. "How many rounds do you have left?" Rourke asked. "Enough," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The relay console hummed between them. "You know I can't let you walk out of here with this equipment intact," he said. "You know I can't let you touch it," she said. He raised his weapon. She raised hers. And then from outside, not a knock, not a radio call, not a signal, a sound she had been listening for across 5 hours of darkness. Vehicles, multiple vehicles moving fast on the mountain road. The distinctive sound of military transport on ice. Rourke heard it. She watched his face absorb it. She had estimated 2 hours, possibly 3, when she heard Warren's voice at 10:58. It was now 12:31, 1 hour 33 minutes faster than her most optimistic estimate. Warren had pushed that road harder than she thought possible. "That's my backup," she said quietly. Rourke's weapon did not lower. His eyes did not move from her face. He was calculating she could see it, running numbers on the time it would take vehicles to reach the gate, from the road approach the number of personnel. Warren could have brought the current state of his own force after 5 hours of operating in the cold without achieving the objective. "Destroy the console," he said, not to her, to the 2 team members who had come through the door behind him. She shot the relay console's power coupling with her last clear round, not to destroy it, but to engage the backup power isolation protocol, which the manual said would protect the core relay hardware from external power surges and physical shocks for up to 4 hours. She had read that manual. She had read everything. The console went into protective mode with a sound like a lock engaging. Rourke's people moved toward it anyway. She stepped between them and the console. One arm 7 rounds in the particular expression of a woman who has been shot and sealed her own wound and written a field report one-handed and held a military installation for 5 hours and has not run out of things she is willing to do. "Last warning," she said. Neither of them moved forward. Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the vehicles were getting louder. She could hear shouting now from the perimeter. Warren's people hitting the fence line, the crack of gunfire beginning commands, being called out in the specific cadence of U.S. military personnel who know exactly what they are doing. "Stand down," Rourke said, to his people, not to her. They looked at him. "Stand down," he said again. "It's over." She did not lower her weapon. Not yet. She watched him turn and face the doorway, and she watched the calculation in his face complete itself. The math of a man who understood that walking into a military relief force with a weapon raised was a different situation than the one he had planned for, that the report she had already sent made flight a bad option and martyrdom a worse one. That the most tactically sound choice available to him was the one she had been forcing him toward all night without fully knowing if she would live to see it. "Don't touch the console," he said to her, and the absurdity of it. Silas Rourke, commanding 50-something armed mercenaries, telling her not to touch her own equipment, was so complete that she almost smiled. "Get away from my relay," she said. He moved away from the console. He set his weapon on the floor. He put his hands up. Outside, Fort Resolute was filling with American soldiers. She kept her rifle raised for another 30 seconds because that was the appropriate protocol, and because she was not done until she was done, and then she lowered it when Warren came through the door with 3 soldiers behind him, and his eyes went to her shoulder, and then to her face, and then back to her shoulder with an expression that she would remember for years. "Cross," he said, just her name, the way her father used to say it when she did something he hadn't thought she could do. "Warren," she said, "you're hit." "I'm aware." "How bad?" "Bad enough, not bad enough." He looked at Rourke. He looked at the relay console, locked and intact in its protective mode. He looked at her, standing in front of it with her rifle at low ready, and her left arm held against her body, and her white hair, and her face that was carrying everything. The last 5 hours had cost her all of it, without performance, without drama, without any of the things people show when they want credit for what they've survived. "We need a medic in here," he said over his shoulder. "I need a sit rep first," she said. "Cross, sit rep Warren. How many of them did you get?" He told her. The perimeter was secure. The surviving mercenaries, 41 of them, the rest having retreated into the mountains, when the military vehicles hit the road, were being zip-tied and processed. 3 of Warren's people had taken minor injuries on the approach. None were serious. She nodded. She processed all of it. She filed every number, every status, the way she filed everything with the methodical thoroughness of a woman who needed to know that the thing she had spent 5 hours defending was actually safe before she allowed herself to stop defending it. Then she sat down, not in the chair this time. She sat down on the floor back against the relay console, rifle across her knees, because the floor was solid and close, and her legs had been reliable for 5 hours, and she was going to allow them to stop now. Warren crouched down beside her. He did not say anything right away. He just sat there in the red glow of the console's emergency indicators, with the sounds of his soldiers processing the aftermath outside, and Rourke being led away by 2 MPs in the Alaskan night, finally going quiet around Fort Resolute. "You held it," he said. "It was worth holding," she said. She heard footsteps on the hard floor behind her, the medic Warren had called, and she let them begin working on her shoulder without moving from where she was sitting, because she was going to stay right here next to this console until someone physically moved her, because she had told this relay that she would hold, and she had held, and she was not done until she said she was done. Outside, through the damaged east wall, she could hear the Alaskan wind moving across the snowfield. Cold, constant, indifferent to everything that had happened here. She thought about the 3 communities sleeping behind that relay signal. She thought about them not knowing. She thought about her father, who had been right about everything he ever told her, and who would never know about tonight, because he had been gone for 4 years, and that grief was something she carried quietly, the way she carried everything. "Good soldier," Warren said softly, to no one in particular, or to everyone, and she understood that he meant it the way her father would have meant it, not as rank or assessment, but as the highest thing he knew how to say. She did not answer. She closed her eyes for the first time since 6:42 p.m. Fort Resolute was still standing. The relay was still running. The line had been held, and the woman who had held it was still breathing, which was not something she had guaranteed herself at any point in the past 5 hours, and which was in this moment enough. The medic's name was Specialist Donna Reyes, and she had been in the Army for 3 years, and she had never in her career worked on a patient who kept trying to give her a tactical briefing while being treated for a gunshot wound. "Sergeant Cross, I need you to hold still." "I'm holding still." "The entry point is on the posterior lateral aspect of the deltoid the round passed through. I already sealed it with a trauma kit at approximately 11:15. The seal is compromised on the lower edge because of cold exposure and movement, and there is probable partial damage to the rotator cuff based on the range of motion I have been tracking since the wound occurred." Reyes stopped working for a moment and looked at her patient. "You diagnosed yourself." "I needed to know what I was working with." "While you were still in the fight." "Yes." Reyes went back to work and said nothing else for 30 seconds, and then she said very quietly, "You are the most terrifying person I have ever treated." And Evelyn understood this as a compliment and accepted it as one. Warren was standing in the doorway of the relay room, dividing his attention between the processing of captured mercenaries happening in the vehicle yard and the woman sitting on the floor of the relay room, who he was not going to let out of his sight until she was on a medical transport. He had made that decision the moment he walked through the door and saw her, and he had not revisited it. He had also made another decision, one that he had not announced and would not announce until he was ready, which was that someone was going to answer for tonight in a way that went beyond paperwork and apology. He had been in the Army for 14 years. He understood how accountability worked and how it didn't, how the machinery of military justice could grind slowly or quickly, depending on who was pushing it and how hard. He intended to push very hard. "Warren," Evelyn said. She had not moved from the floor. Reyes was immobilizing her left arm in a field sling, and she was letting her because she had accepted that the arm was done for tonight and possibly for longer than tonight. "How did you get here so fast?" He looked at her. "I drove. The road was supposed to be impassable. It was bad. We made it work." "Vale told you not to come." A pause. Warren's face did a thing it did when he was choosing his words carefully, a slight tightening around the eyes that she had learned to read over 2 years of working in proximity to him. "Vale told me not to come," he confirmed. "And you came anyway." "I came anyway." She looked at him for a moment. "What did that cost you?" "I'll find out tomorrow," he said. "I don't particularly care." She wanted to say something about that, about the fact that he had risked his career, possibly more than his career, to drive a mountain road in the Alaskan dark, to reach a soldier that everyone else had decided could wait until morning. She wanted to tell him what that meant. But she was very tired, and the words felt large and complicated, and she had never been good at large, complicated things when she was exhausted. "Thank you," she said instead, and she said it in a voice that tried to carry more than those 2 words usually held. He understood. She could tell by the way he looked away for a moment toward the damaged east wall, because men like Warren received genuine gratitude the same way she received it, with discomfort and a need to look at something else for a second. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have to figure out how you got left here in the first place." 3 a.m. They moved her to the medical transport at 1:43 a.m. She walked. She insisted on walking, and Reyes had stopped arguing with her about anything 20 minutes ago, on the basis that it was not worth the energy. Warren walked beside her through the vehicle yard where his soldiers were processing 41 captured mercenaries, and she looked at each face she passed with the particular attention of someone cataloging, filing, recording. One of Rourke's men, young, maybe 25, sitting with his hands zip-tied in front of him and a look on his face that mixed anger with something that might have been bewilderment, looked up as she passed and said, "You're the one, just you." She stopped. Warren stopped with her. She looked at the young man for a moment. He was not threatening. He was genuinely trying to reconcile something, the 5-hour ordeal he had just survived, against the single wounded woman standing in front of him. "Just me," she confirmed. He stared at her. He looked at her white hair, her immobilized arm, the blood on her collar that the field dressing hadn't fully hidden. He looked at her face, which was calm and direct and gave nothing away. "How?" he said. She considered the question. It was a real question asked without hostility, and it deserved a real answer. "I knew the ground," she said, "and I knew what I was defending. You didn't have either of those things." She walked on. Warren fell into step beside her. Behind them, she heard the young man say something to the soldier next to him. She didn't catch the words and then go quiet. The transport was warm. Warmth hit her like a physical force when she climbed in, and she let herself feel it. She let it go through her in a wave, because she had been refusing to fully register the cold for 5 hours. And now she could register it. Now she could let the body process what the mind had been managing it through. She sat on the bench and looked at her hands. They were still steady. That was the first thing she checked. They were cold and slightly stiff at the joints, but steady. And she felt a specific private relief at that, not because she needed to keep shooting, but because steady hands were how she knew her nervous system had held through the night the way she'd needed it to. Warren sat across from her. He had a thermos of coffee that one of his soldiers had apparently thought to bring, which struck her as the kind of practical human gesture that she would never have thought of herself in a crisis situation, in which she was deeply grateful for now. He poured a cup and handed it to her without asking. She drank. Real coffee, hot, terrible, the best thing she had tasted in months. "Tell me about Vale," she said. Warren's jaw tightened. "Later, when you've been seen by a real doctor and slept for approximately 12 hours. Tell me now. I need to know what I'm walking into." He looked at her. He made the calculation. She could see him making the one, about whether she was strong enough to hear it versus whether she had earned the right to know it. He decided correctly that the second question made the first one irrelevant. Vale knew you were there, he said. That's the bottom line. He knew. When I showed him the manifest discrepancy, he didn't look surprised. He looked managed, like a man reciting a prepared answer. The roads are impassable. The sector is secure morning extraction. He had the language ready. He planned to leave me, she said, not a question. I believe he made a deliberate decision to classify you as low priority and postpone your extraction without disclosing that the postponement was indefinite. Low priority, she repeated. The words tasted exactly like she expected them to. I know. Support personnel. I know, Cross. She drank her coffee. She thought about a man sitting in a warm command post, looking at a clipboard, drawing a line through a name, and going to sleep. She thought about the specific calculation behind that line, the weighing of one soldier's safety against administrative convenience, against the minor discomfort of admitting that the evacuation had been poorly managed, against whatever personal dynamic had made him look at her record, and her white hair, and her quiet professionalism, and decide that she was the one who could wait. She thought about how much she wanted to be angry. She was angry. She had been angry since 6:59 p.m. and she had been managing that anger the way she managed everything, using it as fuel rather than letting it be a distraction, pointing it at the problem rather than at the people who had created the problem. But now the problem was solved and the anger was still there, and she was very tired and her shoulder hurt, and she was sitting in a warm transport with coffee in her hands, and the anger had nowhere useful to go. What happens to him, she said. I have recorded orders, Warren said. Communications from his terminal showing he was aware of your presence at the installation at 1800 hours on the day of evacuation, and then a series of decisions made after that time that directly delayed any response to your situation. I also have his statement to me verbal in front of 2 witnesses that the roads were impassable and the sector secure. I drove those roads tonight, Cross. They were passable. They were difficult and they were passable. She looked at him. He lied, Warren said, on record, to protect himself, and I intend to make sure that the people who handle this understand exactly what he did and exactly what it cost. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, don't let them make this about me. What do you mean? When they investigate, when they write the reports and hold the hearings and process whatever happens to Vale, don't let them make this a story about one soldier and one bad officer. This is a systemic failure. The manifest process failed. The verification protocol failed. The assumption that support personnel can be sorted differently from combat personnel failed. All of it failed. Warren looked at her steadily. You want them to fix the system, not just punish the person. Punish the person, she said, and fix the system. Both. 2:29 a.m. She fell asleep in the transport somewhere on the mountain road, and she did not dream. And when she woke up, they were at the forward medical station in Fairbanks, and someone was trying to take her rifle. I'll hold it, she said instantly, completely awake. Sergeant, we need to. I'll hold it. She looked at the medic reaching for the weapon with an expression that communicated very clearly that she was not unconscious anymore, and that the rifle was hers and that they could address the shoulder as long as no one touched the rifle. Warren appeared at the transport door. Cross, let them do their job. Tell them to leave the rifle. He looked at the medic. Leave the rifle. The medic looked at both of them, made a professional decision to prioritize the shoulder, and left the rifle. The medical team worked for 3 hours. The shoulder wound was worse than her field diagnosis had estimated. In one specific respect, the round had done more damage to the joint capsule than she had felt, which was not unusual because cold environments suppress pain response, and she had been running on adrenaline and discipline for 5 hours. The prognosis was serious but not permanent. Surgery would be required. Full recovery of function was possible but not certain and not fast. She asked the surgeon twice for a best-case timeline. He told her she might have limited function back in 4 months and full assessment of permanent damage at 6. She filed that information without visible reaction because the information was what it was, and her reaction to it didn't change it. What she felt privately was the specific grief of an athlete hearing a diagnosis. Not the grief of fear, but the grief of a person who lives in their body's capability and has just been told that capability is going to be different for a while and possibly forever. She let herself feel it for approximately 30 seconds in the privacy of her own mind, because 30 seconds was appropriate, and she did not believe in either suppressing things or in letting them grow larger than they were. Then she let a nurse sedate her for the surgery, and she went under holding her own hands together in her lap. And the last thing she was aware of was the warmth of the room and the sound of professional people doing their jobs. And she found that deeply unexpectedly comforting. 9:14 a.m., the first thing she registered when she came out of anesthesia was that someone was in the room. She did not open her eyes immediately. She listened first. The breathing pattern of someone seated slightly irregular in the way that people breathe when they are trying not to make noise. The occasional shift of a chair. Present and trying not to impose. She opened her eyes. Warren was sitting in the chair beside the bed, with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hands. Looking at nothing in particular, the way a person looks when they have been sitting somewhere long enough to run out of things to do with their eyes. He looked up when she moved. His face shifted into something that was not quite relief. It was past relief, beyond it into the territory of things you feel after the crisis is over and you have had hours to sit with what almost happened. "What time is it?" she said. Her voice came out rough from the intubation. 9 in the morning. "How long have you been sitting there?" "A while." She looked at him. "Warren." 4 hours, he said. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about a man sitting in a chair for 4 hours in a hospital room because he felt responsible for something and did not know how to address that responsibility, except by being present. And she thought that this was a very Warren solution to a Warren problem, and that it was somehow both unnecessary and exactly right. "You don't have to," she started. "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm here because I want to be here. There's a difference." She accepted that. She had spent her whole career being told that needing people was a liability and being on her own was strength, and she was tired of that being the operating framework. She was tired. Full stop. Not of this, not of the army, not of the work, not of the cold and the difficulty and the demands. Tired of being treated as if requiring nothing made her more valuable. Tired of the quiet, professional distance that had allowed one man to look at a clipboard and make a decision about her expendability without anyone pushing back. "Tell me what's happening with Vale," she said. Warren straightened slightly. He was relieved of command at 0600 this morning. Pending investigation for negligence, falsification of operational records, and obstruction of the relief mission. She absorbed that. He's fighting it. His initial statement attributed the manifest omission to a software error in the evacuation system. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly what she would have predicted, and the predictability of a man trying to preserve himself was in its way as exhausting as everything else about him. "And your recorded orders," she said, "are very clear." Warren's voice was level and final. "He knew you were on that base. He made a choice. It's documented." She nodded slowly. Her shoulder was an immense specific ache under the bandaging, the kind of pain that was dull and enormous and would be part of her life for a long time. She registered it and set it aside and thought about what came next. "The investigation," she said. "They're going to want my statement." "They are. You don't have to do that today." "I know I don't have to do it today. I want to do it today, while everything is precise." Warren looked at her. She could see the thing he was feeling, the particular tension of someone who respects someone else enough to not argue with them and also cares enough to want to. It was a specific combination, and she had not encountered it often in her career. That exact texture of respect mixed with concern, and she found she wanted to honor it even as she overrode it. "Give me 2 hours to fully wake up," she said. "Then I want to give my statement." He nodded. He stood. He looked like he was going to say something and then decided against it and then decided for it. "I should have pushed harder last night, before the convoy left. I looked at that manifest and I had a feeling, and I let Vale's rank make me question the feeling instead of the manifest." She looked at him for a moment. "You came back," she said. "Cross. You came back. You drove an impassable mountain road in the Alaskan dark, and you came back. I'm going to let you sit here and flagellate yourself for the part before that." He looked at her. Something in his face settled, not resolved, because men like Warren didn't resolve guilt easily, but settled into a place where it could be carried without being crushing. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. 11:33 a.m. The investigators arrived at 11:33 a.m., 2 of them a colonel from the Inspector General's office and a JAG officer with a laptop and a recorder. They were professional and thorough, and they had clearly been briefed on the basics because they did not ask her to explain the situation from scratch. They asked specific questions, and she gave specific answers in the precise, unembellished style of someone who understood that the value of a statement was in its accuracy and not its drama. She told them everything: the manifest omission she had discovered at 6:59 p.m., the sensor activation at 7:11 p.m., the force composition, 92 individuals organized and equipped operating under command discipline, the 5 hours and 49 minutes of defensive operations, every tactical decision she had made and why, the wound when it occurred, how she addressed it, the relay status throughout, the transmitted report she had filed from the console at midnight. The colonel listened without interrupting. The JAG officer typed without stopping. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted several seconds. "Sergeant Cross," the colonel said, "I want to make sure I understand the timeline correctly. You detected the incoming force at approximately 7:11 p.m. You had at that point no confirmed communication with Central Command and no indication that relief was coming. Correct. And you made the decision to defend the installation rather than attempt to evade into the mountains." "I did." "Can you describe the reasoning behind that decision?" She thought about how to explain something that had not felt like a decision so much as a recognition. The recognition that there was only one thing she could do that was consistent with who she was and what she had trained for and what she understood about what was at stake. "The relay serves 3 communities," she said. "If Black Summit had seized it and used it the way Rourke described to intercept traffic and redirect emergency coverage, those communities would have been exposed during a period when they had no alternative communications infrastructure because of the cyber attack. I calculated that the risk to them was greater than the risk to me, and I made the decision accordingly. And the risk to yourself," the colonel said carefully, "was that you were alone against 92 armed individuals." "Yes." "Were you afraid?" The room was very quiet. The JAG officer's typing stopped. "Yes," Evelyn said, "every minute." The colonel looked at her. "That's a very honest answer." "The fear didn't make the decision," she said. "I made the decision. The fear just had to come along." 1:18 p.m. The investigators left at 1:18 p.m., and 30 minutes later, a general officer Evelyn had never met came to her room, which told her that whatever was happening in the administrative machinery above her had reached a level of attention that was going to complicate things considerably. Brigadier General Patricia Marsh was 61 years old and had the specific energy of someone who had spent 40 years making the military do things it didn't want to do, which was to say she moved quickly and spoke directly and did not waste either of their time with preamble. "Sergeant Cross, I've read the preliminary report. I've spoken with Captain Warren and with the investigators and with 3 members of the chain of command above Lieutenant Colonel Vale. I want to ask you 2 things directly." "Yes, ma'am." "First, the Army is going to recommend you for its highest military honor. I am here to tell you personally and in advance because you deserve to hear it from a person rather than paperwork. Do you understand?" Evelyn looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." "Second, is there anything you want that recommendation to accomplish beyond what it represents personally? I'm asking because you told the investigators this morning that you wanted the investigation to focus on systemic failure. I want to know if that extends to the recognition process as well." Evelyn thought about that. She thought about what her name on an award would do, what it would become, the legend that would grow around it, the way people would make her into a symbol. The White Sentinel, 1 woman against 982, held the line, all of it accurate and true, and also not the thing she wanted people to take away from tonight. "I'll accept the recognition," she said. "What I don't want is for the system to give me a medal and then use the medal to avoid asking why one officer could make a unilateral decision to leave a soldier behind without anyone catching it." Marshall looked at her steadily. "What would you ask for instead?" "A protocol," Evelyn said. "A mandatory independent verification process for evacuation manifests. No installation is cleared until every assigned person is accounted for by 2 separate officers. The process cannot be overridden by a single command authority. It has to be structural." Marsh was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about this?" "I had time last night between contacts." Something shifted in the general's face. Not quite a smile, but the movement of one that she had decided not to fully let through. "I'll be honest with you, Sergeant. That protocol is already being drafted. Your operational report, the one you filed from the relay console at midnight, was comprehensive enough that the people reviewing it had most of the systemic gaps identified before your statement this morning. Evelyn thought about herself one-armed in a relay room with Rourke cutting through her door, typing a field report because she had decided the information was too important to leave in her head. She thought about how it had felt in the moment necessary focus, not heroic, just the next thing that needed doing. Good, she said. There will be a private ceremony, Marsh said. Your terms, your guest list, your timeline. We are not going to put you in front of cameras unless you specifically request it. I don't request it. Understood. Marsh stood. One more thing, Sergeant. Off record. She paused. My first deployment, 1987, I was the only woman in a forward unit in a place I'm not going to name. My commanding officer at the time made it very clear in ways that were never written down that my presence was considered temporary and my contributions were considered secondary. I did my job anyway. I did it for 12 years in that climate before things started to change. She looked at Evelyn directly. What you did last night is the kind of thing that changes things. Not because of the military honor, because of the report you wrote, because of the statement you gave this morning, because of the specific documented irrefutable evidence that treating one person as expendable is not a minor administrative error, it is a catastrophic operational failure. You gave them a case they cannot ignore. Evelyn held the general's gaze. I just told the truth. I know, Marsh said. That's the part that makes it work. 3:47 p.m. Vale's formal relief from command was announced at 3:47 p.m. Warren told her, coming through the door with his phone in his hand, and an expression she couldn't immediately read, satisfaction, mixed with something more complicated, the way justice sometimes feels when you have been waiting for it long enough, that the arrival doesn't feel the way you expected. He's going to fight it, Warren said. His lawyer is already talking about procedural issues with the recorded evidence. Let him fight it, Evelyn said. The documentation is solid. It is. Warren sat down in the chair that had apparently become his permanent position in this room. How are you feeling? Like someone shot me and then a surgeon repaired it. That's accurate? She shifted against the pillow. The pain in her shoulder was the only thing in her field of awareness that she was not managing. She had decided to let it be there fully, rather than expend mental energy on suppression, because the suppression was expensive and the pain was going to be there regardless. Her father had taught her that too. Don't fight what you cannot change. Use what you cannot change. Warren, she said, yeah, I want you to know something. When Rourke talked to me through the relay room door, he said that the people who should have protected me had already made their decision about my value. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to offer an exit, trying to make me feel like the loyalty I was showing wasn't owed. She paused. And the thing is, he had a point. Someone had made a decision about my value. That was real. It happened. Warren was very still in the chair. What I want you to understand, she said, is that knowing someone had drawn a line through my name and decided I could wait, knowing all of that, I would still make the same choice. Not because those people deserve my loyalty, because the people behind that relay deserve to have someone standing there. The people who never made any decision about me at all, who never knew I existed. They're the ones I was there for. He did not say anything for a long moment. I know, he said finally. I don't want to become a story about betrayal and vindication, she said. I don't want people to take away that the lesson here is do your duty even when your superiors fail you, because that's the wrong lesson. The lesson is that the system failed specifically and documentably, and the system needs to be fixed so that no other soldier is ever in the position I was in last night. That's the story I want told. Warren looked at her. She could see him absorbing it, the full shape of what she was saying, and she could see the moment when he understood that she was not angry and she was not performing courage. She was simply being exactly who she had always been, the woman who read the equipment manuals, who hiked the ridges on her off days, who carried a trauma kit for 3 years without needing it, who saw the problem clearly and addressed the problem directly and did not require recognition to know the work was worth doing. Okay, he said, then that's the story we tell. She looked at the ceiling. The afternoon light was coming through the window at an angle she found unexpectedly peaceful. Clean the particular quality of Alaskan winter light that was different from any other light she had lived under. I'm going to need physical therapy, she said. Months of it. The surgeon said full assessment of permanent damage at 6 months. I know, I spoke with him. You spoke with my surgeon. You were unconscious. She looked at him. He had the slightly defensive expression of a man who realizes he may have overstepped and is also not sorry. She decided to let it go. I want to go back to work, she said. When I'm cleared, not desk work, real work. Define real work. I want to teach, she said. And that surprised her slightly as she said it, not because it was wrong, but because she hadn't known it until she heard herself say it. Marksmanship, defensive planning, survival under pressure, the things I used last night. I want to teach them to people who are going to need them and who won't have the same preparation I had. She paused. My father spent 12 years teaching me how to do the thing I did last night. Somebody did that for me. I want to do it for someone else. Warren was quiet. Then he said, I think that's right. I know it's right, she said. 5:22 p.m. The young female soldier who knocked on her door at 5:22 p.m. was from Warren's relief team, a private first class named Torres who had been on the approach last night and who had apparently been working up the courage to come to this room for several hours because she appeared in the doorway looking like she expected to be dismissed. Evelyn looked at her. Come in, Torres. Torres came in. She stood at attention, then seemed to realize that might be inappropriate given that the person she was visiting was in a hospital bed and shifted into an uncertain parade rest that communicated all of this internal conflict very clearly. At ease, Evelyn said. What is it? I just wanted to. Torres stopped. Started again. When we came through the perimeter last night and I saw the base, the damage to the building and the blocked road and all of it, I knew what it meant, what you had done. And she stopped again. She was 22 or 23, Evelyn estimated with the specific look of someone who had entered the Army with ideas about what it meant and was in the process of revising those ideas in real time. What did you want to say? Evelyn asked. Not unkindly, directly because directness was a kindness when someone was struggling to get to the point. I wanted to say that I know you didn't do it for the recognition, Torres said all at once, as if she had rehearsed the sentence and needed to deliver it before she lost her nerve. I could tell when I saw you that you weren't doing it to be seen. You were just doing it because it was the thing to do. And I wanted you to know that I saw it anyway. Evelyn looked at the young soldier in the doorway. She thought about what it would have meant to her at 22 for someone to say that. For someone to look at the quiet, unconventional white-haired girl who read equipment manuals and hiked ridges on her off days and see not, despite those things, but because of them, something that mattered. Thank you, she said. That means something. Torres nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more and couldn't find it. She started to turn to go. Torres, Evelyn said. She stopped. You drove that road last night in the dark, knowing what you were going toward. Torres looked slightly confused as if this fact had not struck her as significant. Yes, ma'am. Don't let anyone tell you that's not the same kind of courage, Evelyn said. It is. Torres left. Warren, who had been standing in the corner of the room the whole time in a way that made Evelyn feel he was learning something from this interaction, stayed. She's going to be a good soldier, Evelyn said. She already is, Warren said. Evelyn thought about that. She thought about all the soldiers who did good work that nobody cataloged, that nobody filed a report about, that never generated an investigation or a ceremony or a recommendation. She thought about her father who had done good work for 20 years and come home and taught his daughter how to shoot and how to breathe and how to stand when everyone had decided she would fall. And she thought that his contribution to last night was as real as any round she had fired and that no one would ever write his name in any report. I'm going to be all right, she said, to no one in particular, or to everyone, or to herself, which was the person who most needed to hear it. Warren, who had been there since 4 a.m. and had no intention of going anywhere, said simply, I know. Outside the hospital window, the Alaskan afternoon was going dark the way it always did this time of year, fast and complete, the light just folding away into blue and then into black, as if the sky was pulling a curtain patient and indifferent and entirely unsentimental. Fort Resolute was 4 hours away on a mountain road that was passable in the dark if you drove carefully and knew what you were doing. The relay was still running, somewhere in 3 communities she had never visited, and whose names she knew only from the technical documentation people were going about their evenings without knowing. Without knowing that there had been a night, a very specific and terrible night, when the equipment that connected them to help had nearly been taken, and the only thing standing between them and that outcome was a woman who had been forgotten by one person and remembered by herself. She would never tell them. She did not need to. That wasn't the point of it. She had held the line. Not for recognition, not for vindication, not to prove anything to anyone who had doubted her. She had held it because behind every line there are people, and people are worth holding for. And that had been true on the mountain at minus 24 degrees, with one functioning arm and 92 enemies. And it was true now, and it would be true tomorrow. And it was the only thing she had ever needed to know. Her shoulder ached. Warren sat in the chair beside her. The lights in the room were warm. She closed her eyes, and this time she slept without checking the sensor display first. 6 months later. The physical therapist's name was Marcus Webb, and he had worked with injured soldiers for 11 years, and he told Evelyn Cross on her first day that he had never had a patient who approached rehabilitation the way she did, which was the same way she suspected that she approached everything, with the quiet, methodical focus of someone who understood that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is just a series of next things. And the only way to cover it is one thing at a time. The shoulder had required 2 surgeries. The first, the night she came in, addressed the immediate structural damage. The second, 6 weeks later, repaired a secondary complication that the surgeon described as not unexpected, given the conditions under which the wound had been sustained and managed. She had listened to both pre-surgical briefings with the same focused attention she gave to equipment manuals, asking specific questions, tracking the answers, filing the information in the part of her mind that dealt with operational parameters. Marcus Webb told her at the end of week 8 that she was ahead of the recovery curve. She told him she was aware of that. He told her that being ahead of the curve didn't mean she should push harder. She told him she understood the distinction between efficient recovery and accelerated damage. He looked at her for a long moment and then said, "You've already read the literature on this, haven't you?" It was not a question. "I read it in the hospital," she said, "before the second surgery." He shook his head slowly, not in disapproval, in the specific way of someone encountering a person who is genuinely different from everyone they have worked with before. The nerve damage her surgeon had warned her about, the thing that had kept full prognosis uncertain for 6 months, resolved at the 4-month mark to a degree that surprised the medical team and did not surprise Evelyn, because she had done everything Marcus Webb told her to do, and several things he hadn't specifically told her to do, but which the literature supported and which she had assessed as reasonable, and outcomes tend to follow preparation if you give them enough time. At the 5-month mark, she fired her rifle for the first time since the night at Fort Resolute. She was on the range alone in the early morning before anyone else arrived, because she had wanted to do this without an audience. Not from embarrassment — she had never been embarrassed by difficulty — but because this particular moment felt private. She had not held this rifle with both hands since the night she had been shot, and the reunion between her body and the weapon she had carried for 3 years was something she needed to experience without having to manage anyone else's reaction to it. She raised the rifle. She settled her cheek against the stock. She found her breath and let it move through her the way her father had taught her: complete exhale, natural pause, consistent and patient. She fired. The round hit the center of the target at 300 yards. She stood there for a moment, holding the rifle, both arms working her shoulder, aching at a level she classified as manageable and tolerable, and nowhere near prohibitive, and she felt something move through her that was not triumph and not relief exactly, but something quieter and more complete, the feeling of coming back to herself after a long time of being adjacent to herself. "Good," she said aloud to no one, the same words she had said to the empty relay room when she had decided to hold the line. She fired 14 more rounds. All of them hit, not because she was trying to prove something, because precision was her language, and she had missed speaking it. She had spent those 6 months doing several things simultaneously in the manner of a person who does not know how to be fully idle. She completed her written testimony for Vail's court-martial, which was scheduled and proceeding. She corresponded with the Inspector General's office regarding the systemic protocol reform she had requested in her statement. She accepted an invitation to speak to a Senate Armed Services Subcommittee about evacuation procedures, which she attended in civilian clothes and addressed in the same direct, unembellished manner she addressed everything, and which was apparently so different from what the senators expected that 2 of them asked her to repeat answers she had already given clearly the first time, as if they were looking for the performance underneath the plain language and couldn't find it. She visited her father's grave on a Tuesday in March. She had not been able to go in the months immediately after the funeral 4 years ago because she had been deployed. She had carried that absence the way she carried most things quietly in the background, present, without being paralyzing. She sat beside the grave for 45 minutes and talked to him the way she had talked to him when he was alive, which was directly without filler, telling him the things she thought he would want to know. She told him about the night, all of it. She told him about the sensor reading at 7:11 p.m. and the decision at 6:59 and the snow plow and the foam canisters in the maintenance pit and Rourke's voice through the relay room door. She told him about the shot that hit her shoulder and the seal she applied by touch in the cold and the word received coming back through the static. She told him that she had been afraid every minute and that the fear had not mattered. She told him that everything he had taught her had worked. She sat quietly for a few minutes after that, and the wind moved through the cemetery. The way wind always moves, patient and indifferent and not unkind, and she felt the particular peace of having said the true thing to the right person, even across a distance that conversation cannot technically cross. "I'm going to teach," she told him. "Same as you." She stood up. She drove back to the base. She went to sleep early because she had an early morning the following day, and preparation was still as it had always been, the thing she trusted most. The formal assignment came through at the beginning of month 6. U.S. Army Northern Warfare Training Center, Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Instructor Advanced Marksmanship and Defensive Operations. Effective upon medical clearance, which her surgeon signed at the 5-month and 3-week mark, with a note that said, in the dry language of medical documentation, patient has demonstrated full functional recovery of the affected shoulder with residual sensitivity that does not preclude return to duty. Patient compliance with rehabilitation protocol was exceptional. Warren called her the day the assignment came through. She picked up on the second ring. "You got it," he said. "I got it. How do you feel?" She thought about the question. She thought about how she had felt standing at that grave in March and on the rifle range in the early morning and sitting in the hospital room the night after the surgery when the pain was worst and she had made the decision quietly and without ceremony that she was going to come back from this fully rather than partially. "Ready," she said. Warren laughed. Not the polite professional laugh of a superior officer, but the real one, the one she had only heard from him a few times that came from somewhere genuine. "Of course you do." "What happened with Vale?" she asked. She had been following the court-martial from a distance through official channels and through Warren's periodic updates, but the final resolution had been pending, and she had not heard. Warren was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means the answer is significant. "Guilty on all 3 counts," he said. "Negligence, falsification of records, obstruction. He's been removed from service. The review board is recommending forfeiture of pension benefits tied to the negligence finding." She sat with that. She had told Marsh in the hospital that she didn't want this to be a story about betrayal and vindication, and she had meant it. But the finality of the ruling settled something in her that she recognized had needed settling. Not for herself, not for the anger she had managed through the night and the months after, but for every soldier who would come after her and who would now walk into an evacuation process that had one additional layer of accountability, because the absence of that layer had cost someone specifically and documentably everything they had that night. "Good," she said. "There's more," Warren said. "The protocol you asked for, independent dual verification for evacuation manifests. It's been adopted, Army-wide, effective 90 days from the ruling." She was quiet. "Cross, I heard you. That was you. That's yours." She did not respond to that directly because the thing she was feeling was not pride exactly, but something that lived in the same neighborhood. The specific satisfaction of having done a thing completely, of having held the line all the way through past the night and into the daylight, and through the months of testimony and rehabilitation and testimony again, until the thing she had held for was actually secured. "The plaque went up yesterday," Warren said, and his voice had shifted quieter now. "At Fort Resolute. I heard." The memorial plaque she had requested, no names, just the words she had chosen installed on the wall of the communications building that had been repaired and returned to service. She had not gone back to see it yet. She would go eventually, but not yet. Some things needed a little distance before you could look at them clearly. "They wanted to rename the installation," Warren said. "You know that." "I know. And you know I supported your decision not to let them." "I know, Warren. I just want to say, he stopped. He started again. I want to say that the decision not to put your name on that building when you had every right to, when nobody would have questioned it, that was the most you thing you have ever done, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. She thought about her name on a building. She thought about what buildings with names on them meant permanence recognition, the decision of an institution to say this person mattered. She thought about whether she needed that. She did not need that. What she needed was for no soldier to ever be left on a manifest that nobody checked. What she needed was the protocol, the plaque, the reform, the things that would still be working after her name was no longer attached to the story. I'll see you when I get to Wainwright, she said. I'll be there, he said. She reported to the U.S. Army Northern Warfare Training Center on a Monday morning in what passed for early summer in Alaska, which was cold and bright and smelled like pine and frozen water. And she walked into her first classroom, a brief pre-range session with 12 new students, and stood in front of them and registered with a clarity that was almost physical what she was looking at. 12 young soldiers, different backgrounds, different capabilities, different reasons for being in a room learning from a person they'd been told about but hadn't met. Some of them were trying to look as if the name didn't mean anything to them. Some of them were not trying to hide that it meant quite a lot. One of them, a young woman in the back row, barely 20, with the look of someone who had spent a lot of time being underestimated and had decided to be very still about it, met Evelyn's eyes directly and held the contact in the way that told her that this particular soldier had been in rooms before where she felt she needed to prove something and was doing the thing you do in those rooms, which is make yourself take up exactly the space you are entitled to and not apologize for it. Evelyn recognized that look the way you recognize a photograph of yourself from a long time ago. She started talking. She did not talk about the night at Fort Resolute. Not yet, not in the way people expected, not as a story that began with 92 attackers and ended with one survivor. She talked about marksmanship first, about the relationship between breathing and precision, about how the most important part of a shot happens before the trigger pull, about how consistency is built in training and accessed under pressure, and about how the difference between a soldier who can shoot on a range and a soldier who can shoot in a crisis is almost entirely a question of what they did in the months and years before the crisis arrived. She talked for 45 minutes without notes because she had been preparing for this conversation for 35 years, which was the entire length of her life, starting with a patient man in a field in Western Virginia who had crouched down to a 9-year-old girl's level and told her that precision was power. When she finished, the young woman in the back row raised her hand. "Sergeant Cross," she said, "everything you have described, the preparation, the discipline, the resource management. You did all of that at Fort Resolute." "Yes." "And they still left you there." The room went very quiet. Evelyn looked at the young soldier. She saw the question underneath the statement, the real question, the one that mattered, the one this young woman had been thinking about since she heard the story, and that she had the specific kind of courage to ask directly if you do everything right, if you prepare and stay disciplined and do the work that nobody asked you to do and read the manuals and hike the ridges and carry the trauma kit, and they still decide you're expendable. What is the point? Evelyn had been waiting for this question for 6 months. She had known someone would ask it. She had thought about how to answer it, not to package it or make it comfortable, but to tell the truth precisely. "Yes," she said, "they left me. One person made a decision that I was not worth the complication of accounting for, and 62 other people drove away from that base and didn't question it. That happened. I'm not going to tell you it didn't, or that it didn't matter, or that systems always protect good soldiers. They don't, not yet. That's why the protocol exists now. That's why we are having this conversation in this room on this morning. Not because the system worked, because it failed, and someone was in the gap when it failed, and she didn't let the failure become the last word." She paused. "But I want to be precise about something," she said. "When I chose to hold that installation, I was not doing it for the institution that left me. I was not doing it to prove that I deserved to be on the manifest. I was doing it for the 3 communities behind that relay who had never made any decision about me at all. And that distinction is the most important thing I am going to teach you this year. Because there will be a moment in your career, maybe one, maybe several, when the system fails you. When someone decides you are less valuable than you are. When the accounting comes out wrong and you are the one left standing in the cold." The room was very still. "That moment will tell you something," she said. It will try to tell you that the failure is about you. That being left behind means you deserve to be left behind. That expendable is a category and you have been sorted into it. She looked at each of them in turn, not quickly, with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who means every word she is saying. It is lying. The failure is about the system. Your value is not determined by whether the accounting was correct. And the question that matters, the only question that matters in that moment, it is not why were you left behind. The question is, who is depending on you to stand anyway? She let that land. She gave it the full weight of silence that it needed. The young woman in the back row was writing something down. Several other students were very still in the way that means something true has reached them. Really reached them past the professional front and into the place where things actually register. Being different does not make you weak, Evelyn said. Falling is not failure. Failure is deciding you cannot stand again. She looked at them all one more time. Now let's go to the range. They went to the range. She stood behind each of them in turn, made corrections, asked questions, listened to the answers. She watched the young woman from the back row take her first shot clean, controlled 3 inches from center at 100 yards, which was solid for a first position assessment, and adjust without being told, finding her own correction through focus rather than instruction. Evelyn did not say anything. She moved to the next student. At the end of the session, she stood at the edge of the range and looked toward the mountains in the north. Fort Resolute was out there 4 hours on roads she knew better than she wanted to. The relay was running, the plaque was on the wall, the protocol was being implemented across every installation in the United States Army. The shoulder ache, the way it would always ache now in the cold, a specific and permanent reminder that she was not unchanged by what had happened. She had never expected to be unchanged. She had expected to be honest about what it cost and then to get back to work, because that was the only way she knew how to honor anything, not by making it into a shrine, but by continuing to do the thing that made it matter. Warren had asked her 2 weeks ago over the phone if she was at peace with how everything had resolved. It was an unusual question from him. He was not generally a peace-focused person, and she had thought about it genuinely before answering. She had told him that at peace wasn't quite the right word. She had told him that what she felt was something more like alignment, the sense of being in the right place, doing the right work for the right reasons, which was all she had ever wanted, and which she had always known she would have to insist on because it was not the kind of thing institutions gave you automatically, especially not quiet soldiers with white hair who didn't chase recognition. She had insisted. She was here. Behind her, 12 soldiers were unloading their rifles and checking chambers and going through the end-of-range protocols she had taught them. One of them was humming something very quietly to herself, the young woman from the back row, not performing, just existing in the moment after a session that had clearly meant something to her. Evelyn listened to the sound of young soldiers doing their work. She thought about her father standing behind her in a field 30 years ago, patient and certain, one hand on her shoulder, telling her that the target was not the enemy. The target was everything between where she was and where she needed to land, and all of it was just information. She had used all of it, every hard year, every dismissal, every quiet accumulation of knowledge that no one thought to ask about. She had used all of it on a night in the Alaskan dark, and it had been enough. And she was here now, and the relay was running and the protocol was in place, and 12 soldiers were learning things that would keep them alive and effective, and capable of standing in the gap when the accounting came out wrong. She was forgotten once by one man with a pen and a clipboard, and a certainty that she could wait. She was not forgotten now. She turned back to her students. "Good work today," she said. "Same time tomorrow. Don't be late." They weren't late, not a single one of them, not ever. And that, more than any medal, more than any ceremony, more than any plaque on any wall, that was what holding the line had made possible. A generation of soldiers who knew in their bones that no one is expendable, no one is left uncounted, and the line is always, always worth holding.